Jon Snow had spent the better part of the day in the library tower poring over ancient tomes that Maester Wolkan had retrieved from the recesses of Winterfell's dusty archives. A bitter wind rattled the arrow slits and a swirl of snow drifted inside each time the old door opened or someone crossed the threshold. The north was sinking deeper into the cold and the long nights, but Jon had grown used to the chill in his bones. He was a man of the Night's Watch once, and winter was no stranger to him. Still, there was a certain gravity to this particular winter. He felt it in the way the wind howled, and he glimpsed it in the gray skies that never seemed to break to reveal the sun. Something momentous was coming, though whether that would bring doom or deliverance, Jon could not say. He ran his hand over the lines of a ragged parchment from a volume titled The Targaryen Mysteries, Relics of the Crown. He had never expected to see such a book in the north. Written in a flowing, formal style, the text made cryptic reference to dragon eggs once carried far and wide by Targaryen princes, secrets that might have been left in unexpected places centuries ago. His eyes skimmed the faint lines, bits of half-ciphered detail about how certain eggs could remain dormant for ages, how they might find themselves in the strangest corners of the world, awaiting only the right conditions to spark the flicker of life. A candle sputtered at his side. Each time its flame dipped or bent to the side, Jon felt an unnameable pang of anxiety, as though the shadows gathering across the page were trying to hide something from him. The great library was quieter than a tomb that afternoon, but outside he could hear distant voices echoing in Winterfell's yard, men training with wooden swords, children chasing one another in the fresh snowfall, a pair of hounds yipping near the kennels. That everyday bustle was a reminder that life continued even amidst rumors of White Walkers, the rightful claims of queens and kings, and the shifting alliances that had seized Westeros since the War of the Five Kings. Ever since he learned the truth of his birth, if one could call it truth, he found himself hungrier for knowledge about the Targaryens. It wasn't that he thought to claim the Iron Throne or call himself the rightful king. No, he didn't want that. What he did want was to understand. Rhaegar Targaryen, his father. Lyanna Stark, his mother. It was a lineage that felt as impossible as it was real. Even now, after Samwell Tarly had shown him proof, after Bran's strange visions, after ghostly recollections whispered by the crypts themselves, Jon struggled to believe it. Yet here he was, reading about Targaryen relics, about dragon eggs that may have been hidden or misplaced in ages past. He never truly expected to find anything in Winterfell itself, or anywhere in the north. Dragons were the stuff of legend in these parts, known only by old stories that King Torrhen Stark surrendered to Aegon the Conqueror in order to spare his people from Dragonfire. Still, when curious passages beckoned, when the faint possibility of discovering something that might link him more tangibly than birth to the House of the Dragon emerged, Jon found himself unable to let it go. He was about to turn another page when a quiet voice roused him from his immersion. "Jon?" It was Sansa, wrapped in a heavy cloak of gray and white fur. Her bright auburn hair framed her face in the lamplight. "We're gathering for the evening meal soon." Jon looked up, eyes bleary from squinting at small text by candlelight. "Of course," he said softly, letting the book close with a small puff of dust. "I'll be there in a moment." She stepped closer and brushed her hand gently over the worn cover of the tome. "Still looking into Targaryen histories?" He nodded, a little uneasy. "The more I understand about what I am, the better I can serve the North. There must be some reason the gods let me be born to both Stark and Targaryen blood." Sansa hesitated. She was a Stark through and through, but she had traveled a long road that taught her caution and keen perception. "Come down to supper," she said, her voice measured. "You're a brother to me, Jon. No matter what blood runs in your veins, you'll always have the North in you." She left him with that, and he was grateful for her presence. Despite everything they had faced, everything they had lost, Winterfell stood. The North was his home. But the silent call of that old book, those old Targaryen secrets, refused to let his mind rest. That night, the wind howled fiercely. The meal ended in quiet conversation, people too tired or cold or worried to make merry. Jon excused himself early. His steps carried him back to the library. The torches flickered in the corridors, casting dancing shadows along the stone walls. He pushed open the thick wooden door to the library tower, expecting the same hush as before. He found Samwell Tarly waiting there, hunched over the table. "Sam," Jon's voice was low, but in the stillness it echoed. Sam looked up with a start. "Jon, I was just..." He tapped a different book, not the Targaryen one, but something older, with pages of yellow parchment so delicate they threatened to crumble at a careless touch. "I've been following a reference. Something about how the old kings in the north stored precious relics or spoils of war in the crypts." Jon raised an eyebrow. "We've searched the crypts from top to bottom. You think we missed something?" Sam's grin was faint but insistent. Perhaps. The text is so old it predates the conquest. It claims that a dragon egg was once offered as a token to the King of Winter, a sign of fealty or something to ensure peace. Possibly from House Targaryen or one of their bannermen. I can't be sure of the details. A faint chill danced over Jon's skin. The possibility was extraordinary. But how could such an artifact remain hidden all this time without someone noticing? Does it say exactly where in the crypts it might be? No, Sam said, sighing. Not exactly. Only that it was placed near the tomb of some Stark ancestor, likely a king who was particularly revered or perhaps particularly cunning. The text is half lost in the fade of centuries. But it's worth looking. Jon considered the idea. The crypts were enormous, labyrinthine. But if there was even a shred of truth in Sam's discovery, it might hold some significance. We'll need to search carefully, he said. Without stirring up panic, Winterfell's crypts were known for their echoing darkness. The carved stone likenesses of Starks long dead, each with a direwolf at his feet, their swords laid across their laps. People said the crypts were haunted. Jon knew ghosts of a different sort dwelled there. The memories of the past, the truths hidden from him until he was nearly grown. He gave Sam a brief nod. Tomorrow, before dawn, we'll take a lantern and search. Sam smiled, relief in his eyes that Jon took him seriously. Together, they closed the old books and locked them away in a chest for safekeeping. Outside, the cold bit sharper than before. Clouds scudded across the moon, and it seemed all the stars had shivered out of the sky. That night, Jon dreamed of dragons. He dreamed of vaulted wings beating against a stormy sky, of talons raking the ancient stones of a castle courtyard, of dragonfire bursting forth and melting legions of ice. He woke in a sweat, ghost curled at his feet, the direwolf's red eyes fixed on him. He sank back into the bed, heart still pounding, uncertain what the dream might mean and whether it was a harbinger of doom or hope. Before dawn, he rose. True to his word, Sam was waiting in the courtyard, puffing out frosty breaths as he clutched a flickering lantern. Together they slipped away into the crypts, without telling anyone else for now. The stairs descended deep beneath the ground, each step cooler than the last. The hush was absolute, broken only by the echo of footfalls and the drip of distant water. Ghost padded alongside them, quieter than a shadow. They navigated row upon row of stone kings. The older the tomb, the less Jon recognized the faces and the names carved into the walls. All about them lurked the stern presence of Stark lords. Brandon, Roderick, Torrhen, countless forebears turned to stone. The air was stale and smelled of dust and the faint hint of earth. Sam consulted the old manuscript by lantern light, scanning the cryptic lines. It says something about a low archway near the resting place of the Silent King. Not sure which that is. The Silent King, Jon repeated softly. He'd heard the name in passing. Brandon the Quiet or Edric the Silent, some lesser-known Stark from centuries past. He led Sam deeper until they found a black granite statue whose features had been worn smooth by the passage of time. The plaque below the effigy was unreadable, lost to erosion. But the shape of the statue's head, turned slightly inwards, was reminiscent of old legends of the Silent King, who never spoke a word after the death of his family in a wildling raid. Or so the story said. A small archway, half collapsed, led into a narrower corridor. The dust on the floor was thick, undisturbed by footprints. Here and there, rubble had come loose from the ceiling. In some places, they had to crouch to move forward. The air became even cooler, making Jon's breath plume. He felt a strange tingle in his spine as though the darkness itself clung to them. At last, the corridor ended in a modest alcove. No statue, no nameplate, just a crumbled alcove that might have once been a tomb for someone too insignificant or too forgotten to have their likeness carved in stone. Sam raised the lantern, and the flickering light revealed something in the back. An old chest bound in rusted iron. The wood was black with age, patches of mold clinging to it. Jon stepped forward. He tested the lid, creaked, then gave way with a groan. Inside lay a bundle of rotted cloth. Carefully, he parted the tattered folds. he was prepared for disappointment. A stash of old coins or worthless trinkets. Instead, he found himself staring at something round, the size of a man's helmet, colored in swirling shades of dark green and bronze. The shell was scaled, glimmering even in the dim lamplight. A dragon egg. Jon's chest tightened. He gently lifted it. Its surface felt icy cold, yet he sensed a potential deep inside it, like a coal waiting to be fanned to life. The wonder of it nearly overwhelmed him. Sam gasped in amazement beside him. Even Ghost crept closer, nose twitching, as though the direwolf sensed something unusual in that old shell. How is this possible? Sam said at last, breathless. Jon didn't know. He only knew that the swirling pattern of green and bronze reminded him uncannily of Rhaegal, Daenerys Targaryen's dragon, the one named for Rhaegar. Was it truly Rhaegal's egg? That seemed impossible. Rhaegal was already hatched, alive, half a continent away. Yet Targaryens often named multiple dragons in honor of one ancestor, or perhaps the color pattern was merely similar. Jon was no expert in the lineage of dragon eggs, but the piece of shell in his hands was undeniably that of a dragon. Of that he was certain. He recalled that Daenerys herself had hatched eggs by walking into her husband's funeral pyre. The memory was still half legend, though word had spread across the world of the miraculous birth of her dragons. Could this egg be awakened in a similar manner? Or was it too old, too long dormant? Jon exhaled, steadying himself. He gently placed the egg back in the chest for safekeeping. "We should hide this," Sam murmured, "at least until we know more." Jon nodded in agreement. The wars in Westeros had shifted drastically since Daenerys first arrived in the Seven Kingdoms, but if word got out that a dragon egg lay in Winterfell, the ramifications would be immeasurable. Jon carefully rewrapped the egg in the cloth and placed it into a satchel. They navigated back through the crypts, hearts pounding. Part of him could barely accept this new reality. He'd come searching for scraps of Targaryen lore, never truly expecting to find something so tangible, so immense. They emerged into the pale light of pre-dawn. Winterfell's courtyard was still mostly deserted. A few guards paced the battlements and stable hands were beginning their morning chores. No one seemed to notice Jon and Sam hustling across the yard. They slipped into one of the older towers where Sam had a small room filled with manuscripts. There, Jon set the satchel on a table. It felt almost alive in his hands. "What do you intend to do with it?" Sam asked, voice trembling with excitement and fear. He took a step back as though the egg might suddenly crack open and release a living flame. "I'm not sure," Jon said truthfully. "I'll keep it safe. We'll do more research. Perhaps we can learn how Daenerys' eggs were awakened." Sam nodded, running his fingers over the scruff of his beard. "She used fire, a fire so intense that it burned away everything. Miraculous circumstances, blood magic, perhaps the death of her husband, the death of the witch. But that was in Essos, in a pyre that might have been guided by the old gods or the Lord of Light. Or just by her Targaryen blood." Jon's gaze lingered on the egg's shell. "I feel something," he admitted. "In my dream last night, I saw a dragon. Maybe the gods are speaking. Or maybe it's just my mind playing tricks." Sam placed a comforting hand on Jon's shoulder. "Whatever it means, we'll face it together. Dragons can help us against the threat beyond the wall. The White Walkers, we saw what the Night King did to Viserion. If a living dragon is in our power, it could turn the tide for the living." Jon set his jaw in determination. Yes, there was that thought. A dragon allied with the North might mean more than any crowned figure in King's Landing. The egg felt heavier now, not just in weight, but in destiny. "We should keep quiet about this," he said, "until we know if it can even be hatched." And so they kept the egg hidden. Days passed, turning into weeks. Winter deepened and the morale of the North was uneasy. Bran's warnings of the White Walkers reached further south, but the realm was slow to unite. Even with ravens sent to the lords of Westeros, the fear was that men's hearts would remain divided by old grudges and new ambitions. Sansa and Arya coordinated the strengthening of Winterfell's defenses. The blacksmiths hammered day and night, forging dragonglass weapons from the cache Jon had brought from Dragonstone. The hush over the courtyard often fell into grim silence when it snowed, as though they were bracing for a siege that might come from the swirling wind itself. Jon found himself drawn often to the tower room where Sam guarded the egg. The shell's green and bronze shimmer grew familiar to him. He took to placing his bare hand upon it, almost expecting it to be warm. But it never was. It remained stubbornly cold, as if the ancient heart inside had forgotten how to beat. Still, at times, Jon thought he caught a faint sense of stirring, like a single pulse in the deep. Maybe it was wishful thinking, but maybe not. Late one night, Jon sat alone in that small chamber, a single candle burning near the egg. The flame cast dancing reflections across its scales. Ghost lay by the door, ears pricked as though sensing Jon's agitation. The memories of Daenerys' stories, walking into the pyre, the searing heat, the miracle of hatching filled Jon's thoughts. Could he replicate that? Was that even wise? He recalled Melisandre's talk of the Lord of Light, of king's blood and sacrifices. It made him uneasy. Yet Targaryens were said to be blood of the dragon, sometimes unburnt by flame. Could he do it? Dare he even try? Lord of Light, old gods, any gods who will listen, Jon muttered under his breath, if this egg is meant to hatch, show me the way. He touched the shell again, and for a heartbeat he could have sworn it felt warm. He drew back in surprise, but the shell felt cold as ever. Was he imagining things? Before he could puzzle further, a knock sounded on the door. Sam entered, eyes heavy with fatigue and a sheaf of parchment clutched in one hand. "Jon, I think I've found something," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. A reference in an old Valyrian scroll describing how some eggs were awakened in places of intense heat, volcanic caverns, natural hot springs, or some Targaryens used the Winterfell hot springs to warm the castle centuries ago. But that might not be enough heat. The scrolls mention that truly dormant eggs require a living flame, or the fire made flesh. That's about as cryptic as it gets. Jon glanced at the flickering candle. "You mean more than just a hearth fire or a blacksmith's forge," then he said quietly. "You think it needs something else?" Sam's face was lined with worry. Blood magic or an intertwining of energies we can't fully understand. Perhaps the presence of someone with Targaryen blood helps, like Daenerys. "But you are of Targaryen blood, Jon." Jon looked away. He still wasn't comfortable with that idea. It felt odd, a truth that didn't quite fit with how he saw himself. "If that's what it takes, then we try. But carefully. No burning pyres, no sacrifices. We do this in a way that doesn't cost innocent lives." Sam's relief was palpable. They had all witnessed enough sacrifice and bloodshed. They agreed to keep searching for a safe method to see if the legends offered a clue about the kind of fire that could coax a dragon from an egg. The days dragged on. The White Walkers were drawing closer if rumors from the last hearth were to be believed. The northern lords became restless, some wanted to march out, some to fortify. Meanwhile, ravens from the south told of a realm in turmoil. Cersei Lannister sat on the Iron Throne, unyielding in her refusal to send troops to the north. Daenerys Targaryen, for her part, had taken the bulk of her forces east of King's Landing, trying to hold strategic ground. Winter had slowed all armies. The question was, would help arrive in time? Amidst the swirl of war, the egg remained hidden. Jon carried it sometimes to his quarters at night, as if drawn by some invisible pull. He would hold it and stare into the cold fireplace, imagining flames dancing around him. He remembered the half-forgotten dream of the dragon that soared overhead, molten fire shining against the ice. It was becoming clearer now each time he closed his eyes. But still, the egg did not hatch. One bitter twilight, with a storm raging outside, Jon climbed the ramparts. The wind nearly stole his breath away. Below, the courtyard was empty except for patrolling guards. The stables looked small in the swirling snow. He glanced up at the dark sky. Winterfell's hot springs steamed behind the walls, giving rise to plumes of mist. In the gloom, he thought he saw a flicker of movement at the gates. He ventured down and found Tormund Giantsbane trudging inside with a handful of wildlings. Frost clung to Tormund's beard and his eyes flashed with urgency. "They're close," he told Jon. "The dead. Me and my folks saw them near the Umberlands. We got out while we still could." Alarm rang through Jon's mind. They were nearly upon the North's doorstep. "We'll prepare the defenses," Jon said. "We've got dragonglass, flaming trenches to be lit. We'll do all we can." Tormund's gaze was grave. "Have you more of that dragonfire? The stuff I heard Queen Daenerys used at the battle by the lake." Jon shook his head. "Her dragons are to the south. We can't rely on them. We'll rely on ourselves." The words sounded hollow, for he knew that the White Walkers would be a brutal foe. Their armies of whites were relentless, and the Night King might be astride that stolen dragon, Viserion. An undead dragon, an abomination. Jon swallowed, recalling the egg. Perhaps the North would have its own dragon if only he could make it hatch. But how? The next day, as the sun struggled to break through iron clouds, Winterfell's inhabitants hurried with final preparations. The yard filled with men stacking barrels of pitch, erecting sharpened stakes. The ring of hammers never ceased. The gates were reinforced, the walls manned by archers ready to rain dragonglass arrows down on the undead. A hush of grim determination clung to every corner of the castle. And still, that cold dread in Jon's chest would not abate. Late that night, he returned to the tower chamber, found Sam dozing over a half-written manuscript. Jon gently shook him awake. "Sam," he murmured, "go get some rest in a proper bed. We'll need your mind fresh when the battle comes." Sam blinked, then yawned mightily. "Sorry, I was just reading more about the conditions for hatching dragons. I found an old reference to a Targaryen bastard who hatched an egg in the Vale. But it said he walked through a brazier of wildfire." Jon grimaced. "I won't do that. Too unpredictable. Wildfire could burn the castle down or kill half the people here. I don't want such destructive magic." Sam nodded. "I understand. But it might not need to be wildfire. Maybe there's a simpler way. You are of Targaryen blood. Perhaps if you tried to warm it by your own body heat or gave it a few drops of your blood." Jon's expression darkened. "Blood magic," he said under his breath. "I have no faith in such things. But if it's my blood alone, it's my choice." Sam offered a weak shrug. "I don't know if that's enough. But I do know that the egg will never hatch unless we do something. Time is running short." Left alone, Jon gazed at the egg, lit by the single candle on the table. The swirling scales seemed to shift in the flickering light, mesmerizing. The memory of Melisandre's rites, her talk of king's blood, pricked at him. But he also thought of Daenerys's fearless step into the pyre. Maybe Targaryen blood was a key indeed, but also an acceptance of the flames. Fire and blood, the Targaryen words. He had never wanted to be that. He had wanted to protect the realm, stand for the living, not to become some monstrous figure who embraced fire at the cost of everything else. Yet the undead army threatened them all. If the egg could be roused to life, if a dragon could be hatched to fight the whites, that might save thousands. Slowly, he withdrew the dagger from his belt, a simple steel blade, not Valyrian steel. He wouldn't risk harming the blade's enchantment if any existed. He stared at the edge. Ghost growled softly as if sensing Jon's intention. With a trembling breath, Jon pricked the side of his palm. A bead of blood welled up. He pressed his palm against the egg's shell, letting the warm, wet drops smear across the scales. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, faintly, Jon thought he felt a stir. A tremor, almost imperceptible, but real. His breath caught in his throat. He pressed his hand more firmly, wincing at the pain of the cut. Another drop of blood trickled down the shell. The candle flame wavered, casting dancing shadows across the chamber walls. Ghost rose to his feet, ears flat, growling low in his throat. Jon's heart pounded. The tremor ceased as abruptly as it had begun. He pulled his hand away, the cut stinging, blood trailing down his wrist. The egg looked unchanged, though perhaps the swirl of colors was slightly brighter. He couldn't tell if that was real or wishful thinking. He took a linen scrap from the table and pressed it to his hand, staunching the blood. As the tension ebbed, he realized how feverish he felt, how the closeness to that ancient shell had stirred something deep inside him, something primal, a voice that whispered in his mind, "Wake, my child of winter. Wake, O dragon of the north." He didn't know whose voice it was. Maybe it was just his own hopes. Exhaustion overtook him. He had to prepare for the impending siege, for the White Walker's inevitable approach. With a last glance at the egg, he left the chamber. Ghost padded after him, occasionally glancing back as though expecting the egg to hatch then and there. 3 days later, the horns sounded from the watchtowers. The dead were coming. Word spread through Winterfell like wildfire. Sansa and Arya took command of the defenses on the walls, while Davos helped coordinate supply distribution. Bran, with his uncanny gifts, waited in the godwood beneath the ancient weirwood tree. Men lined the battlements, armed with dragonglass arrows and spears. A hush settled like a veil of dread as the sun sank. Torches burned, illuminating the yard. In the distance, the wind carried a keening wail that some claimed was the White Walkers themselves. Snow began to fall, thick and heavy. Jon stood at the front gate, Longclaw at his side. He could feel the ache in his bones, that sense of doom. He had faced them before, beyond the wall, at Harhome. He knew how terrifying and unstoppable they seemed. But he also knew that dragonglass could kill them, that Valyrian steel could slay them. His gaze swept the rows of living men and women who stood with him, trembling but resolute. Wildlings, northerners, knights from the Vale, a smattering of Riverlanders. They were as ready as they could be. The night deepened. Silence stretched out, broken only by a stray cough or whispered prayer. Then they heard it, a rustling, shuffling wave of movement approaching from the darkness. Thousands of whites stumbling through the snow. Pale hands, rotted faces, empty eyes. Beyond them, looming shapes, White Walkers astride dead horses. The watchers on the walls lit the trenches with flaming arrows, and lines of fire sprang up around Winterfell. Yet the dead pressed forward, ignoring the flames until enough bodies collapsed to smother them. A surge of horror ripped through the defenders. Jon roared, "Archers! Loose!" A volley of arrows rained upon the undead ranks. Dragonglass arrowheads shattered bones. Some wights collapsed, but more swarmed over them. Ghost barked at Jon's side, hackles raised. The clang and boom of battle erupted, screams echoing in the night. Men in the front lines locked shields, stabbing with spears, only to be dragged down by the relentless tide. The smell of death and rot and fear thickened the air. Somewhere in the swirling chaos, the White Walkers advanced, taller and thinner than human men with eyes of bright blue ice. They raised spears that seemed carved from crystal. Their presence alone chilled the air further, so the defenders' breath froze in their lungs. Jon met one's gaze across the field of bodies and flames. The memory of the Night King raising the dead at Harhome flashed in Jon's mind. He felt despair claw at him. Where was the hope? Where was the fire? Then, from above, an unholy shriek rent the sky. The undead dragon, Viserion, soared overhead, empty eye sockets glowing blue. It spewed a torrent of icy flame that hammered the walls, shattering stone, sending men and women screaming to their deaths. The devastation was immediate and horrifying. Parts of Winterfell's ramparts collapsed in on themselves, burying archers under rubble. Fires sputtered, then were extinguished by the unnatural cold of Viserion's breath. Jon stared in helpless fury. They were outmatched. Daenerys's living dragons were too far away to help them. Or perhaps they were locked in some southern battle. He thought of the egg hidden in the tower. If only. A White Walker thrust a spear at Jon. He parried with long claw which glowed faintly in the torchlight. The impact jarred his arm, and he gritted his teeth, forcing the walker back. These inhuman creatures were strong as they were silent, but Jon had bested them before. With a desperate slash, he sheared through it. Shards of ice-like flesh scattered, and the walker dissolved into drifting frost. But the wights kept coming, numbering in the thousands. Women and men screamed. The courtyard was soon overwhelmed. Jon fought desperately, aware of Tormund, Brienne, Arya moving through the chaos. Sansa oversaw archers from the upper walls. Sam was somewhere behind the lines, defending the wounded. The line was starting to break. If they could not hold, Winterfell would fall. The living would be consumed by the horde. Another chunk of the wall collapsed under the undead dragon's assault, sending stones raining down upon screaming defenders. With a fierce growl, Jon knew he had to gamble everything on the egg. It might be too late, but he would not stand by while the living fell. He hacked his way through the ranks of wights, Ghost at his side, until he reached the tower entrance. Wights clawed at him, broken fingernails raking his armor, but he and Ghost drove them back enough to slam the door shut. Barring it, Jon stormed up the stairwell, shouting for any living soul to fall back to him. The tower room was dim, lit by a single sputtering torch. The egg stood on the table. A wave of emotion overcame Jon, fear, anger, desperation, all swirling together. He seized the egg, clutching it to his chest. Perhaps it was madness, but he could think of no other option. He drew the same steel dagger and slashed his forearm, wincing at the sting. Blood streamed down his flesh, dark against his pale skin. He dripped that blood over the egg, pressing it close. "Hatch," he whispered, voice ragged. "For the sake of the living, Hatch." He remembered the stories of Daenerys walking into flames. Wild desperation flashed in his eyes. He flung the torch onto the tapestry by the wall. The old fabric caught instantly, and flames leapt up, dancing hungrily. He stood there in the tower, holding the egg as smoke began to billow. "Fire and blood," he breathed. "I am a Stark, and I am a Targaryen. If the gods will it, let this egg awaken." The flames spread, licking at the wooden beams and old straw on the floor. Smoke burned Jon's throat, stinging his eyes. He didn't move away. Ghost whined from behind him, reluctant to approach the blaze, but unwilling to leave Jon's side. The heat grew intense, searing his hair, scalding his exposed skin. Jon trembled, tears forming from the smoke. He pressed the egg against him, feeling for that faint stirring. He felt a sudden burn across his chest where the scaled shell rested. Shock coursed through him. It wasn't just the fire of the room, something inside the egg felt hot, as though an ember had been kindled at last. A tremor shook his arms. Then the egg cracked. A thin line split the shell, shining with an eerie green glow from within. Jon gasped, nearly dropping it. Another crack splintered the shell, and a shrill cry, muffled by the shell, pierced the smoky air. The baby dragon, if it truly lived, was fighting its way into the world. Flames raged around Jon. His clothes began to smolder. He coughed violently, pain lancing through his lungs. Ghost howled. Jon staggered, half blinded by smoke, arms wrapped protectively around the egg. "Come on," he rasped. "Live?" The shell broke open with a sudden snap, and in the swirling chaos of the inferno, Jon found himself staring into tiny, glowing eyes set in a reptilian face. A hatchling, greenish-bronze scales glistening with fluid, emerged from the shards. It let out a wail that resonated with Jon's blood, with something deep in his soul. The heat in the room seemed to intensify, as though drawn to this newborn creature. The baby dragon, no larger than a cat, clung to Jon's chest, its claws pressing into his skin. It blinked at him, snorted smoke from its tiny nostrils, then let out a breath of hot air. Jon's eyes widened. He felt faint from the smoke, from the agony of standing in the flames. But he clutched the creature to him, turning to see if there was any way out. The door was ablaze, the ceiling above him cracking with new flames. "Ghost!" he cried, his voice hoarse. The dire wolf circled anxiously, trying to find a route of escape. They were about to be trapped by the fire Jon himself had kindled. Summoning all his strength, Jon pressed forward, free hand wrapped in part of his cloak to shield himself. He kicked at the door until it splintered outward, then threw his shoulder into it. The corridor was filling with smoke, but it was marginally clearer than the blazing chamber behind him. Ghost bolted through, and Jon followed, half carrying, half cradling the newborn dragon. He coughed, his vision swimming. The weight of the baby dragon was slight, but it burned hot against his chest. He staggered down the stairs. A pair of northerners saw him emerge, flames licking the corridor behind him. They rushed to help, eyes full of shock at the sight of Jon's singed clothes and the tiny reptile attached to his front. "My lord," one cried. "Seven hells, what is that?" Jon just coughed, struggling to speak. "A dragon. Help me put out the fire." The men ran to fetch water, calling for others. Jon sank to his knees in the hallway, the baby dragon letting out a squeaky hiss. It was so small and vulnerable, yet the heat radiating from its scales was nearly unbearable. Ghost hovered, sniffing at the newborn. A primal tension hung in the air, direwolf and dragon, face to face. But the dragon let out a soft chirp, as if in greeting, and Ghost merely snorted. Jon looked down at the hatchling, chest tight with relief and astonishment. He'd done the impossible, brought a dragon to life in the heart of the North. The moment might have overwhelmed him entirely had it not been for the screams and clang of battle echoing from outside. The living were losing. White walkers and whites had broken through the gates. The undead dragon's unholy flame had shattered part of Winterfell's walls. The dead were pouring into the courtyard. People were fighting desperately among toppled wagons and broken weapons. The night was alive with terror. Cradling the baby dragon close, Jon forced himself up. Each breath hurt, each movement jostled his burned skin, but he still gripped Longclaw in his other hand. As he stepped into the courtyard, the sight made his heart seize. Bodies lay strewn everywhere. The world was illuminated by the flicker of torches, the red glow of distant fires, and the glaring blue flames spewed by the undead Viserion overhead. A chunk of the rampart crumbled, and a figure fell, screaming, into a throng of whites. A white walker advanced on Jon, crystal spear raised. He braced himself, lifting Longclaw. But before the walker could strike, the little dragon on Jon's chest hissed. Its eyes flashed. A tiny jet of flame burst from its mouth, hardly more than a candle's sputter, but enough to startle the White Walker. Jon seized the moment, swinging Longclaw in a wide arc. The blade bit into the walker's torso, and it shattered in a blast of frost. Jon continued on, calling for any survivors to rally. The men and women who saw him stared in disbelief. A baby dragon perched on Jon Snow's shoulder? Some cried out that the gods had given the North its own dragon. Others cheered, raising their weapons. The living needed hope, any hope, to keep fighting. Jon realized the hatchling was trying to fly, flapping its wet, leathery wings. It managed only a brief flutter, but the spark of its fire lit something in Jon's own spirit. If they could keep the creature alive, perhaps it would help them. But for now, it was too small to change the tide of battle. Still, maybe there was a chance to drive away the undead if the Night King was slain. The whites surged again, a tsunami of clawing hands and snapping jaws. Jon roared an order, and the defenders locked shields once more. Steel met rotten flesh. People died by the score, but somehow they held the line near the center of the courtyard. Above, Viserion circled, unleashing blasts of icy flame. A group of archers turned their dragonglass arrows on the undead dragon, but the swirling wind and the beast's unnatural swiftness made it a near-impossible target. In a sudden flash, the Night King himself rode into view on the undead Viserion's back, eyes glowing like twin icicles, scanning the fray. Jon felt that same jolt of terror he'd known at Harhome. He had come for them for the living. The baby dragon on Jon's shoulder hissed and spat a small flame at the sight of the undead dragon overhead, as if outraged by the abomination. Jon turned to the men around him. "Protect Winterfell," he shouted hoarsely. "Fight for the living." He spied Tormund, bloody but alive, fending off a cluster of wights near the broken gate. Brienne and Podrick were near the stable, protecting a group of wounded. Arya dashed among the shadows, daggers of Valyrian steel flashing, slaying wights in a blur of motion. Sansa stood on the steps near the Great Hall, a bow in hand, her face set in grim determination. The White Walkers advanced in a line, forming a ring of cold around the courtyard. Jon realized that the only chance to end the nightmare was to kill the Night King. If they failed, the dead would keep rising, wave after wave. Dany's forces weren't here to help them. Time was fleeting. A swirl of icy wind blew across the courtyard as Viserion swooped lower, scattering men who dove for cover. The Night King's visage was impassive, terrible. Jon felt the baby dragon shift on his shoulder, letting out frantic squeaks. The heat emanating from it became more intense, as if it sensed its undead kin in the sky and loathed it. "All right," Jon murmured. He steeled himself. He had to find a way to reach the Night King, to confront him directly. But how could he do that without a mount of his own? Then he remembered how Daenerys had ridden her dragons, forging a bond by blood and fire. This hatchling was too small for that, obviously. But perhaps if the gods were merciful, the new dragon would grow quickly in the presence of so much magic. Targaryen dragons were said to thrive in times of great conflict. Was that only a myth, or was it real? Jon had no time to dwell on it. A fresh wave of wights rushed in, threatening to overwhelm the defenders near the Great Hall. Jon sprinted that way, ignoring the searing pain in his arms and chest. The baby dragon clung on for dear life. Ghost bounded beside him, snapping at the ankles of the undead. With long claw, Jon carved a path, blocking a blow from a reanimated giant's club. The giant roared, half its skull missing, rancid flesh hanging from its cheeks. It swung again, toppling men in all directions. Jon rolled aside at the last instant, slashing at the giant's leg, though it barely flinched. Another fighter hurled a dragonglass axe at the giant's knee, buckling it. With a mighty crash, the giant fell, entangled in broken beams of wood. A hand latched onto Jon's shoulder from behind, a white, mouth agape, reaching with skeletal fingers. He tried to fend it off, but more clutched at him. Ghost snarled, ripping one apart. But two more latched onto Ghost, biting and tearing. Jon's vision blurred with panic. They would be overwhelmed. Then the baby dragon spat a sharper flame, scorching the wights that had pinned Ghost. They recoiled, bodies smoking. Jon seized the chance, slamming them back, burying Longclaw in rotting torsos until at last they fell limp. He dragged himself upright, panting, and saw the courtyard was nearly lost. Bodies lay strewn about, living and undead alike. The stench of death was choking. A group of White Walkers advanced methodically, an aura of bitter cold around them. Above, the Night King circled on Viserion as if savoring the carnage. Time felt like it was running. Jon locked eyes with Sansa across the yard. She had tears in her eyes but raised her chin in defiance. She would fight to the last. Jon took a trembling breath, the baby dragon pressed against his burned chest. He felt the scalding heat from its scales intensify again. Glancing down, he saw its eyes glimmer and smoke rose from its nostrils. Was it growing? Even in that moment of horror, Jon was astonished. The hatchling seemed to gain mass, limbs lengthening in subtle increments. Scales hardened further, taking on a deeper green-bronze color. He had never heard of growth so rapid, but Targaryen dragons were bound by magic and they fed on the life force around them, or so the legends said. Suddenly, the sound of mighty wings beating the air echoed above. For a fleeting moment, Jon hoped Daenerys had arrived with Drogon and Rhaegal. But that hope died when he saw only the undead Viserion swooping down again, unleashing another torrent of ice flame that tore through the ranks of the living. Jon dove behind a toppled wagon, clutching the baby dragon protectively. Ghost followed, limping from a wound in his flank. The flames parted to reveal a line of White Walkers closing in. "This is it," Jon muttered, swallowing hard. All or nothing. He gripped Longclaw so tightly that the leather of his glove tore. The baby dragon let out a high-pitched snarl as if in agreement. The first of the White Walkers lunged. Jon met its spear with Longclaw, sparks flying as ice collided with Valyrian steel. He sidestepped a second walker, but a third flanked him. He was outnumbered, battered, exhausted. Straining with every ounce of strength, he managed to slice through one, then block a stab from another that scraped his armor. The White Walker hissed, stepping back. The last advanced for a killing thrust, but Ghost lunged from the side, sinking his teeth into its arm. The walker shrieked a sound like cracking glaciers, pivoting to throw Ghost off. The baby dragon released a surge of flame that burned bright as a forge fire, searing the White Walker's side. That flicker of warmth in the cold night felt like a beacon of hope. The walker reeled, ice flesh sizzling. Jon capitalized, driving Longclaw forward with a furious roar. The blade pierced the walker's chest and it exploded in a mist of frost. The remaining walker withdrew momentarily, perhaps startled by the dragon's flame. Jon, panting and half delirious, realized that the baby dragon had grown more in those frantic seconds. Now it was nearer the size of a large dog. Its wings flapped with vigor. "It's happening," he murmured, though he hardly believed his own eyes. He'd never heard of such rapid growth. The old Targaryen texts said dragons could respond to the presence of magic, to war, to blood, to all manner of mystical influences. Perhaps the raging onslaught of the White Walkers, the swirling of undead magic, was fueling the dragon's natural power. Or maybe the gods had simply decreed that the North would have its champion this night. The undead parted as the Night King dismounted from Viserion, standing tall at the far end of the courtyard. Snow whirled around him, the moonlight glinting off his carved ice crown. He raised one hand as he had it home, and Jon saw with horror that the dead around them began to stir again, jerking upright, reanimating. Even those who had fallen moments ago. Despair wove through the defenders. How could they hope to stand against an enemy that never truly died? The baby dragon let out a shriek, and its body expanded with a crackling of bone and muscle, growing so fast that it staggered. Its tail lashed, knocking aside the remains of a wight. It spread its wings, each now nearly as wide as Jon was tall. A swirl of heat radiated from it, and Jon felt sweat bead on his brow despite the cold. The new dragon roared, a deep sound that belied its still relatively small form, but it was a roar nonetheless. Jon felt a surge of fierce pride as the creature took a few trembling steps forward. Steam rose from its nostrils and its scaled chest glowed with internal heat. White swarmed toward them from all sides. The dragon exhaled a torrent of flame, scorching a path. Some whites fell to ash immediately while others burned as they staggered. Jon and Ghost, hardened by the dragon's presence, charged forward. Together, they carved and burned a route toward the Night King. At the corner of Jon's vision, he saw Tormund rallying a group of defenders, saw Brienne plunge Oathkeeper into a White Walker, saw Sansa still firing arrows from the steps. They were all fighting for their lives. The Night King strode toward Jon, silent, spear in hand. A ring of White Walkers stepped up behind him, tall and gaunt. It was a final confrontation. Above, Viserion circled, shrieking with unholy power. The newly hatched dragon squared itself, snarling, the ridges on its back standing tall. Though it was still dwarfed by the undead Viserion, it showed no fear. Its pupils narrowed, glowing with fire. A coil of flame licked around its jaws. The Night King leveled his spear, and ice swirled around its tip. Jon gripped Longclaw, bracing for the blow. The monstrous undead Viserion dove, opening its maw for a blast of icy fire aimed at Jon's dragon. Jon shouted a warning, but his dragon was already moving, rearing up on its hind legs, its wings flapping. Fire erupted from its mouth. The two blasts collided in midair, one of ice, one of flame, clashing in a furious swirl of steam and sparks. The courtyard trembled with the impact. For a moment, the swirl of energies was so bright that Jon had to shield his eyes. But Viserion was far larger, older, even undead. Slowly, the ice flame began overpowering the newborn's fire. The smaller dragon's flame wavered under the onslaught. Jon's heart seized in panic. The difference in size and power was too great. Then the baby dragon let out another roar as if calling on every last drop of magic in its blood. Its chest glowed brighter, veins of molten color shining between its scales, and the flame burst forth anew, meeting Viserion's ice in a violent clash. Steam billowed, obscuring the courtyard. Jon seized the moment of confusion. The Night King was temporarily forced to step back, shielding his face from the steam. Jon surged forward, Longclaw raised. He knew he must face the Night King, but the ring of White Walkers closed in around him. The baby dragon battered them with fiery blasts, forging an opening. Jon dodged a spear thrust, parried a slash of crystal. Two White Walkers fell to the dragon's flames, bursting into shards of ice. Then Jon was face to face with the Night King, who regarded him with emotionless, inhuman eyes of glacial blue. Time seemed to slow. Jon heard only the thrum of his heartbeat, the hiss of steam, the crackle of flame. The baby dragon fought overhead with undead Viserion, locked in a swirl of burning air. The watchers in the courtyard, living and dead, seemed transfixed by the confrontation. It all came down to this. The Night King swung his spear, shimmering with frost. Jon blocked it, but the impact nearly wrenched Longclaw from his grip. The Night King was impossibly strong, pushing Jon back a step. Summoning the last reserves of his strength, Jon twisted free, pivoted, and brought Longclaw around in a powerful slash. The Valyrian steel bit into the Night King's side. A shriek that sounded like the breaking of 1,000 icicles tore through the air. The Night King staggered, his blue eyes blazing with fury. Jon knew that one strike wouldn't be enough. He raised Longclaw again, aiming for the Night King's heart. But the undead king thrust out his hand, unleashing a shockwave of icy wind that hurled Jon backward. He tumbled across the snow, vision spinning. Pain shot through his shoulder. He lost his grip on Longclaw, which skittered across the ground. Slow, measured footsteps approached. The Night King loomed over him, spear at the ready to finish him. Jon tried to rise, but his limbs refused to obey. A helpless roar escaped him. He had come so close. Ghost leapt at the Night King, but was cast aside in a burst of cold magic, yelping as he struck the ground. Despair clenched Jon's heart. Then, a furious screech tore through the night. Jon's dragon, blazing with orange and green flame, swooped down in a sudden dive. Its growth spurt continued, pushing it to nearly the size of a horse now, wings outstretched. It barreled into the Night King with a gust of scorching air. The Night King turned, raising his spear to strike, but the dragon clamped its jaws around the icy weapon, shattering it in a spray of frost. The beast pinned the Night King with its claws, letting out a wrathful bellow. Jon felt the scorching heat wash over him. He scrambled for Longclaw, ignoring the agony in his body. Above, Viserion howled, diving to protect its master. The new dragon turned its head up, exhaling a powerful jet of flame at the undead dragon. Their blasts collided once more, producing an explosion of steam. For an instant, the Night King was pinned beneath the newborn's talons, the ice crown on his head beginning to melt. Jon forced himself upright, snatching Longclaw from the snow. In a heartbeat, Jon closed the distance and drove the Valyrian steel blade straight into the Night King's chest. Frost crackled, black ice forming spiderweb patterns across the Night King's armor. A howl of rage and agony burst from the monstrous figure, his eyes flaring bright blue, then going white. Cracks spread across his body like lightning, and he shattered from within, bursting into a storm of ice shards that clattered to the ground. A silence fell, broken only by the moan of the wind. Then, as if a puppet's strings had been cut, the wights began to collapse all across the battlefield. The White Walkers disintegrated, their forms turning to ice dust. Even the undead Viserion let out a final screech, rearing up in midair as cracks spread through its rotted flesh. With a shudder, it disintegrated into a cascade of icy fragments that rained down upon Winterfell's courtyard. The living stared in astonishment. The dead army had fallen. The Night King was no more. Slowly, cheers arose, tentative at first, then growing in fervor. They had won. By the slimmest of margins, they had survived the long night. Jon sank to his knees, trembling from exhaustion and relief. The baby dragon, no, not quite a baby anymore, stood beside him, breathing heavily, wings half unfurled. Its scales glimmered with residual heat, and it gazed at Jon with fierce, intelligent eyes. The courtyard was a wreck, flames, rubble, bodies everywhere. The stench of death hung thick. But they were alive. Sansa and Arya approached, stunned at the sight of the dragon, which lowered its head as though offering respect to them. Brienne, Tormund, Davos, Sam, they gathered around. Some warriors kept their distance, awe and fear warring on their faces. Others, too wounded or too shocked to stand, simply stared. Jon placed a trembling hand on the dragon's flank. The scales felt warm, alive with the pulse of magic. "You fought with us," he murmured. The creature exhaled softly, a puff of warm air that brushed across Jon's cheek. He felt an inexplicable bond forming, something deeper than words. The North had its dragon. Relief flooded him, but so too did sorrow, for he saw the price of victory in the lifeless forms scattered at their feet. Men and women he had known, fought beside, gone forever. He closed his eyes, gripped by a churning mix of grief and gratitude. Still, they had saved the living from an endless night. For a moment, the swirling snow and whirling ash seemed to pause, and the stars emerged faintly overhead, like distant candles in the black sky. The new dragon turned its gaze skyward, letting out a cry that resonated through the courtyard and beyond. Men from the ramparts peered down. Sansa bowed her head in something akin to reverence. Arya's eyes shone with tears. Sam clutched at his wounded arm but managed a trembling smile. Tormund laughed, half-mad with relief, exclaiming, "Snow and his dragon. Gods be good, we truly live in strange times." Jon stood slowly, leaning on Longclaw for support. He reached a hand up to the dragon's neck. It lowered itself, allowing him to stroke the scales. The others watched as if witnessing a myth come to life. Smoke drifted across them all, carrying the tang of burnt flesh and melted ice. But they were alive. Arya approached, face streaked with dirt and blood. "Jon," she said quietly, her voice trembling. "You hatched a dragon." He nodded, unsure what to say. The truth was, it still seemed impossible. Yet the creature was there, real and breathing. He could feel the heat radiating from it, see the swirl of color in its green bronze hide. And in its eyes, he saw something loyal, something that recognized him as kin. Targaryen blood. The price of that heritage. The miracle of it. Sansa drew closer, her cloak torn and singed. She stared at the dragon with wide, wary eyes. Does it have a name?" Jon exhaled shakily, memories tumbling through his mind. Rhaegar, the father he never knew, Lyanna, the mother he never got to meet, the swirling centuries of Targaryen history. This dragon's shell had been green and bronze, reminiscent of Rhaegal. But Daenerys's dragon Rhaegal was fully grown, miles away. The egg must have been from another line, another relic of House Targaryen. He thought of Rhaegar Targaryen singing in the halls, dreaming of a promised prince. Then he thought of the north, of the proud wolves. The name that rose to his lips felt like a blessing, a vow. He gazed at the dragon's face, at the ridges over its sharp eyes. "I'll call you Rhaelyn," he whispered. A merging of Rhaegal and the North's own legends, perhaps. The dragon snorted softly, as if acknowledging the name. The hush lasted a moment longer. Then the survivors began to stir, seeing to the wounded, quenching fires, clearing debris. The once dead whites lay motionless, rotting lumps of flesh on the ground. Their presence was no longer animated by the Night King's will. It was an appalling sight. Jon signaled to those who could stand, urging them to gather the bodies, to tend to the injured. Sam quickly moved to check on the others. Tormund and Brienne organized the remaining fighters. Jon stood with his sisters, with Ghost, and with Rhaelyn. A sudden wave of weariness nearly took his legs out from under him. He'd run on pure adrenaline, fueled by desperation. Now his burns, cuts, and bruises clamored for attention. Sansa placed a hand on his uninjured arm, steadying him. "Rest," she commanded softly, though her own voice was raw. "We'll handle what remains." He gave a nod, but his eyes strayed to the dragon once more. Rhaelyn had laid down in the courtyard, breathing heavily, steam rising from its scales as melted snow trickled off its body. For all its supernatural growth, the creature was exhausted too. Ghost settled near it, blood-matted fur trembling. Even now, direwolf and dragon seemed to share a wary kind of respect. Jon turned to look at the battered remains of Winterfell, half the walls cracked, portions of the keep ablaze or collapsed, corpses heaped in corners. Yet for all that devastation, they had held. The cost had been steep, but they kept the long night from swallowing the world. And now, unbelievably, the north had gained a dragon. Night still cloaked the sky, though the horizon began to lighten with the faintest promise of dawn. The survivors worked quietly, gathering the dead, putting out lingering fires. When the first hint of sunrise broke, it found Jon kneeling near the weirwood tree in the godwood, Rhaelyn by his side. The old white bark and red leaves bore silent witness to the horror of the night. The dragon's eyes followed the drifting flakes of snow, the shimmering leaves overhead. Jon closed his own eyes for a moment, speaking softly in his heart to the old gods and maybe to the gods of Valyria too. He spoke of gratitude for the victory, of sorrow for the fallen, and of hope that Rhaelyn's birth might herald a new dawn. The morning light revealed the extent of the castle's ruin. Black smoke curled from towers that had partially collapsed. The stench of burning flesh was everywhere. The men and women who had survived were half dead with fatigue and haunted by what they had seen. But hope flickered in their eyes. They had done what so many believed impossible. They had slain the Night King, ended the threat of the White Walkers. History would remember this day, though it was built on a foundation of countless sacrifices. Jon rested a hand on the dragon's neck. Its scales were no longer searing hot but pleasantly warm, like embers in a hearth. When it shifted, he saw the faint glimmer of muscle under the scales, and he knew it would keep growing. Dragons did not stop growing unless locked in captivity, or so Daenerys had claimed. He wondered what the presence of a dragon in the north would mean for the future. Tensions with Daenerys, perhaps, or with the lords who were suspicious of Targaryen power. Yet at the same time, many would see this as the North's dragon hatched in Winterfell's very flames, a protector for their people. Word spread quickly, carried on stunned tongues, that Jon Snow, the wolf in the north, the once king in the north, a man with Targaryen blood, had hatched a dragon by lighting himself ablaze in a tower, feeding it his own blood, forging a bond of fire. Some whispered that he must be the prince that was promised, others claimed that only the rightful Targaryen heir could do such a thing. But Jon tried not to let those rumors take root in his mind. He had done what he must to save his people. By midday, they had begun to bury the dead. Jon walked among them, face grim. He paused at the body of a young woman no older than 14, a spear of dragonglass still clutched in her hand. Her eyes were closed, a ring of frost rimming her hair. He felt a surge of sorrow. This was what war demanded. This was the price of living in a world fraught with ancient evils. Some men from the Riverlands, who had traveled north to join the fight, approached Jon. They bowed, as if he were their king. "We owe you our lives," one said. "We saw you strike the Night King down with your sword. You and that dragon. We're yours to command." Jon shook his head. "I'm no king," he said quietly, but they only muttered how they had witnessed a miracle. He walked away, uneasy at the praise. The memory of the Night King's cold eyes haunted him still. Outside the shattered gates of Winterfell, smoke curled from the remains of the Whites. The newborn dragon had devoured some of the corpses, if they could even be called that, seemingly drawn to feed on them. It was a grisly sight, but dragons were predators, and perhaps the magic-laced flesh provided nourishment. Jon stood watch, ensuring no reanimation occurred, though with the Night King gone, there was no will left to raise them. When the dragon finished, it turned to Jon, slinking closer, nuzzling him with surprising gentleness. The stench of burnt meat clung to its muzzle. Jon grimaced at the gore but stroked its scaly snout all the same. Fire and blood indeed. Days passed as Winterfell began to rebuild. No longer a fortress under siege, it became a place of healing and mourning. The blacksmiths hammered to repair gates and sections of the walls. Builders worked tirelessly to shore up the keep. Sansa organized food distribution. Arya patrolled the grounds, ensuring no lurking threat remained. Sam tended to the wounded with what skill he had gleaned from the citadel. People cast curious glances whenever the dragon soared overhead in short flights, practicing. Gee, its wings! Rhaegal was now the size of a large horse and seemed to grow stronger each day, feasting on sheep or goats. The presence of a living dragon in the north was an astonishment that left people unsure whether to rejoice or be afraid. But it had saved them, so they tried to treat it like an ally if at a distance. Jon spent many hours with Rhaegal, forging that strange bond. Sometimes he would place a hand on the dragon's side, feeling the steady rise and fall of its breath. He recalled his days at Castle Black, caring for Ghost as a pup, forging trust with a beast of the wild. This was similar, yet far more dangerous. A single snap of Rhaegal's jaws could take a man's arm off. But Jon never felt threatened. He felt something akin to kinship. The scars from his burns took time to heal. Maesters wrapped salves around his arms and chest. But the injuries were not as dire as they should have been, given the fire he'd stood in. It was as though some force had protected him. Targaryen blood, or destiny, or luck, he wasn't sure which. The cut on his palm where he'd first bled onto the egg had closed to a faint scar, shaped oddly like a half-circle. Each time he looked at it, he remembered the egg cracking open, the birth of the dragon. In the weeks that followed, ravens brought news of the Night King's defeat. The entire realm heard of it, and people across Westeros breathed easier. Yet a new wave of rumors spread that Jon Snow had unleashed his own dragon, that the North possessed Dragonfire. Some lords in the South, especially those loyal to Cersei, whispered that it was a threat. Others considered Jon a savior, a living legend. Daenerys, upon hearing the news, reportedly expressed a mixture of wonder and unease. She had always believed herself the mother of dragons, yet here was her nephew, a Targaryen, who had also hatched a dragon. Politics swirled, uncertain alliances beckoned. Westeros was never simple. For Winterfell and the North, the immediate concern was survival. They had lost too many, and winter would drag on. Yet the land felt a bit less harsh now that the undead threat was vanquished. Families began to rebuild farmsteads, the small folk returned from hiding. Each morning, Rhaegal soared a little further from the battlements, letting out a roar that echoed across the snowy fields. It was a reminder that the North was not helpless. A reminder that, should any threat come again, the Free Folk and the Northerners stood together under the protection of Dragonfire. Jon often walked the courtyard with Sansa and Arya. They spoke of what would come next, how they might help the realm heal from years of war. Jon suspected that Daenerys would not sit idle in Dragonstone forever. The Iron Throne was still contested. The Lannisters held King's Landing, if only tenuously. Daenerys had 2 adult dragons at her disposal, and now the North had 1. Would it lead to conflict or alliance? He gazed at Rhaegal perched on a broken tower parapet, preening its wings. Though only a few weeks old, the dragon was the size of 2 large horses, power incarnate. Sometimes, Jon thought of kneeling in the snows outside the tower door, begging any god that would listen to hatch the egg. He remembered the terror of the flames, the unstoppable avalanche of whites. Had he not hatched this dragon, Winterfell might have fallen to eternal darkness. Now, the North was a beacon, battered but unbroken. Sometimes, in quiet moments, Jon felt a deep stirring in his blood, as though the same flame that lived in Rhaegal coursed through his veins. He had tried to deny his Targaryen half, clinging to his Stark identity. But perhaps both were necessary to face what was to come. Fire and ice together. He thought of the crypts below Winterfell, the place where he had found the egg. Perhaps the old kings beneath the earth had known that one day a new threat would come and that a dragon would be needed to protect the North from the cold. Or maybe it was just coincidence, an echo of some half-forgotten vow. On a day when the sky was the color of slate and the wind carried only the faintest promise of a thaw, Jon stood upon a repaired section of the battlements. Rhaegal crouched beside him. He gazed out at the vast expanse of snow and forest, thinking of the future. He had never sought power for himself. Yet now men looked to him as a leader more than ever. They saw the dragon at his side and the living they had saved. They whispered that the North was unstoppable. But Jon felt only a solemn weight. He reached up, placing a hand on Rhaegal's neck. The dragon blinked, hot breath steaming from its nostrils. For a long moment, neither moved. The North stretched out before them, white fields, dark pines, distant mountains crowned with snow. Somewhere out there, the realm continued, battered by war and intrigue. He thought of the many lords, the many banners. He thought of Daenerys, of the possibility of forging an alliance that might bring peace. Or would they clash, Targaryen against Targaryen, each with their dragon? Rhaegal let out a low rumble as if sensing Jon's turmoil. The warmth radiating from its scales cut through the chill wind. Ghost lay nearby, fur rippling in the breeze, ever watchful. This was Jon's family now, the loyal direwolf, the sister he'd never known he needed, the brother who had glimpsed the past and the future, the friend who braved the library with him, and this dragon. Born of darkness and flame on the very night the dead tried to conquer the living. Rhaegal moved closer to the battlement's edge, wings spreading. Jon realized the dragon intended to fly. It had grown large enough, strong enough, to bear a rider for a short flight if Jon dared. A thrill of fear and wonder rushed through him. He remembered seeing Daenerys astride Drogon, how gracefully they soared. Could he do the same? Blood of the dragon, indeed. The thought both exhilarated and terrified him. He took a breath, placed his hand against the base of Rhaegal's neck, feeling the muscles shift and flex. Slowly, he hoisted himself up. The dragon grunted, shifting its weight, but did not throw him off. Ghost barked an alarm, pacing at the foot of the wall. Jon settled into place between the ridges of Rhaegal's neck, one hand gripping the scaled protrusions. The creature let out a powerful roar, beating its wings a few times, stirring up snow in swirling eddies. The watchers in the courtyard below gaped in shock. Some shouted warnings, others blessings. With a mighty leap, Rhaegal propelled itself off the battlement. For a dizzying moment, they plummeted, the ground rushing up. Then the dragon's wings caught the air, and they soared, climbing above Winterfell's towers. Jon's heart thundered. He clung tight, the wind whipping his hair. Below him, he saw the courtyard, the open gates, the half-ruined walls. Beyond, the snow-frosted fields spread out in all directions. It was breathtaking. And in the beating of the dragon's wings, Jon felt the slow, powerful pulse of life, of magic, of destiny. He guided Rhaegal in a gentle arc, circling the castle. The air was frigid, but the dragon's body radiated warmth. People in the yard pointed, cheering or crying out in disbelief. Jon spied Sansa and Arya on a walkway, both looking up with a mixture of awe and concern. He felt the sting of tears in his eyes, so moved by this gift, this second chance. The North had a dragon, and he, Jon Snow, Aegon Targaryen, some called him, would see it used to protect his people. No matter the cost. He soared a little higher, the wind cutting at his cheeks. Winterfell looked small beneath them, a fortress of stone and memory. Rhaegal roared, a sound that rang across the battlements, echoing back. Jon cast his gaze to the horizon, where the sky grew lighter, hinting at the coming sun. For the first time in a long while, hope sparked in his chest. The night was behind them, the White Walkers defeated. Though many trials remained ahead, for this moment, at least, they had found victory and the promise of something new. As Rhaegal carried him through the crisp northern air, Jon allowed himself to believe that the future might not be solely shaped by war and death. The realm had changed. Dragons were no longer the stuff of far-off queens or ancient histories. Now, the North boasted a fire all its own, and perhaps that fire would light a better path for the living. The hot breath of the dragon, the howl of the dire wolf, the unyielding spirit of Winterfell's people all combined to create a force that no darkness could fully extinguish. He could almost hear the old voices whispering in the wind, from the crypts to the clouds. You are a Stark and you are a Targaryen. Remember who you are. Remember what you fight for. And so Jon gazed upon the snowbound land with quiet resolve. Rhaegal's heartbeat thrumming beneath him, Ghost's distant howl rising from below. They had survived the long night. Now, with the North's new Dragonfire, they would face whatever storms lay ahead. Jon awoke to the smell of tallow candles and boiled milk of the poppy. Daylight filtered in through the rip in Winterfell's tower wall, a jagged gap left by the White Walker's assault. He blinked, orienting himself in the gloom. A bandage wrapped his right forearm, and salves had been applied to the burns that snaked across his chest and shoulders. The lightest patches had begun to peel, while deeper marks still throbbed dully. He shifted, and his muscles complained. For a moment, he recalled the horror of that night. The Whites clambering over corpses to reach the walls, the White Walkers advancing in silent, icy unity, the undead dragon blasting a swath of pale flame through Winterfell's defenses. Then he remembered the moment of reckless resolve, crouched in the old tower with the precious dragon egg cradled to his chest, his own blood dripping onto the ancient shell, the flames licking at the walls, smoke filling his lungs. And then, Rhaegal, newly hatched and roaring, surging into existence like a miracle in the midst of the long night. The memory felt dreamlike, but as he rose to a seated position, pulling aside the coarse wool blanket, he saw the dark greenish bronze outline perched in the corner. Even in the tower's poor light, Rhaegal was unmistakable. The dragon had folded its wings tightly, tail curled around its powerful hind legs, a vigilant statue of living flame. When Jon stirred, Rhaegal lifted its head, slitted eyes snapping open. A rumble echoed in the beast's throat. Those eyes, keen, intelligent, fixed on Jon, as if measuring his condition. "Easy," Jon murmured, though the word came out raspy. His throat felt as though it had been scraped raw. Every time he breathed, the tender flesh in his chest stung with the memory of heat and smoke. He glanced around. Ghost lay near the threshold, nose on his paws, ears pricking at Jon's voice. The faithful direwolf had stayed. A motion in the doorway caught Jon's attention. Sam stepped in, carrying a tray laden with a steaming bowl of broth, bandages, and a pot of thick salve. His eyes flicked from Jon to the dragon and back. He still had that perpetual wide-eyed look of astonishment whenever he looked upon Rhaegal, but his voice was calm. "You're awake, Jon said, clearing his throat. "How long?" 3 days since the battle," Sam replied gently. He set the tray on a small wooden table. "You drifted in and out, not fully conscious. The maesters gave you as much poppy as they dared." His gaze roamed over Jon's bandaged arms. "Your burns are healing, but we'll need to keep applying the salve. You've also a deep bruise along your ribs, likely from being thrown by that shockwave the Night King unleashed." Jon exhaled slowly, letting the wave of lingering pain pass. Any word? He didn't need to explain the question. Sam knew he asked about the state of Winterfell, of their surviving allies, of the realm itself. Sam nodded. "We've begun to clean up. Most of the Whites collapsed the instant he trailed off, glancing at Rhaegal as if still in awe that a dragon had fought on their side. "When you slew the Night King, the entire undead host crumbled. We spent the last days burning bodies, ours and theirs, to ensure nothing remained for any stray magic to reanimate. The White Walkers are gone, the last bits of them dissolved into shards of ice." But his voice grew quiet. "We lost so many, Jon." A wave of sorrow pressed on Jon's chest, heavier than any bandage. He braced himself. "Names?" he managed. Sam lowered his gaze. He and Greyjoy felt, trying to protect Bran and the Godwood, he and a few of the Ironborn bought enough time for the Whites to be pushed back when Rhaegal arrived outside. Lyanna Mormont is gone, too. She fought like a warrior queen until the end. Many of the northern lords are dead or wounded, and so are dozens of your brothers from Castle Black, the free folk, men from the Vale. Some knights from the Riverlands. Others, we're still counting. The yard was a charnel house. Jon closed his eyes, feeling a painful pang at the mention of Theon and Lyanna Mormont. The lists of the dead would stretch far. The victory, if one could call it that, had come at a terrible cost. But the realm is safe from the dead now. The words were quiet, as if uttering them might confirm it. Sam nodded slowly. Yes. Word has spread. Ravens have flown to every corner of Westeros, announcing that the Night King was destroyed at Winterfell, that the White Walkers are ended. Jon opened his eyes. And the Queen? Any word from Daenerys? Not yet, but I'd wager she'll come soon enough. Or at least send an emissary. It's said she's been battling in the Crownlands, trying to draw forces away from Cersei. She had her 2 dragons, Drogon and Rhaegal. He swallowed. I imagine she'll have a few questions when she learns a new dragon hatched in the north. Jon let that sit in the air. He wasn't sure how Daenerys would take it, his own survival, his Targaryen parentage, the existence of another dragon hatched by him in the castle of the Starks. It was the stuff of improbable legends and might well stir suspicions or resentments. But for now, that was a matter for another day. Winterfell needed to recover. We'll handle that when the time comes, he said softly, meeting Sam's gaze. Thank you for watching over me. Sam offered a tired smile. We all watch over each other, Jon. He eyed the dragon, who maintained its silent vigil. He barely left your side while you slept. Flew off to feed now and then, but always came back. Even let me apply salve to your burns. I've never seen a creature so protective, aside from Ghost. Jon turned toward Rhaegal. The dragon's breath rumbled in quiet intervals, more a purr than a growl. He or she? Jon asked uncertainly. Daenerys had mentioned that dragons didn't have quite the same concept of male or female as other beasts, though the scribes in Old Valyria had used masculine or feminine pronouns somewhat arbitrarily. Perhaps it didn't matter. We say he for now. Has he threatened anyone? Not at all, Sam assured him. Most of the time, he stays near you or in the courtyard. But the folk are uneasy. They've seen what a dragon can do, and they know we're lucky he's on our side. The smell alone when he burns the carcasses, well, he shuddered, remembering. Anyway, let's tend to those burns. Can you try to eat a little? Jon nodded, letting Sam fuss over him. He ate spoonfuls of thin broth, each swallow stinging his parched throat. Sam unwound the bandages, cleaning the raw patches of skin with a gentle hand. Jon grit his teeth but said nothing. The memory of far greater pain had tempered him. With each careful dab, Sam reapplied the herbal salve, a mixture the maester had made from comfrey, honey, and some pungent root that cooled and soothed the burns. By the time it was done, sweat beaded Jon's forehead. He sank back, exhausted by the simple act of tending to his wounds. He drifted in and out of a doze while Sam wrote notes on parchment, presumably for the maester's records. A clatter outside roused him. Bootsteps, brisk voices. Ghost stood up, ears pricked. Rhaegal, too, let out a short hiss. The tower door opened to admit Sansa Stark, followed by Arya a step behind. Both wore practical attire, bearing new scars of the battle on their expressions. Sansa's eyes landed on Jon with relief. You're awake. She drew close, taking a moment to regard him. We were worried. Then, with a faint, wry lift of a brow, I didn't doubt you, but you gave us a scare. Arya, arms folded, simply nodded at Jon. We needed your orders, but Sansa's done well. She's no Lady of Winterfell in name only. Sansa allowed a small smile. She looked older than her years, dark circles beneath her eyes, posture heavy with the burden of leadership. I'm glad you're better. Her gaze flicked to Rhaegal. He's grown since you last saw him. Jon shifted his eyes to the dragon. Indeed, in 3 days, Rhaegal seemed to have put on yet more muscle and length. He was now nearly the size of a carriage horse, though far more imposing. The ridges along his neck had sharpened, and his wings, folded at his sides, looked strong enough to carry him in short flights. The growth reminded Jon of Daenerys' dragons in Essos, a reflection that dragons often thrived in times of war or magic. He looks healthy, Jon said. Arya stepped closer, every movement poised, one hand resting near the hilt of a short dagger on her belt. She eyed Rhaegal with curiosity, perhaps some admiration. He saved a lot of lives. Helped you kill the Night King. I've never seen anything like it. One moment it was no bigger than a dog, and the next it was locked in a clash of flame against that thing in the sky. She paused, swallowing. The courtyard was chaos, but he drove back the White Walkers so you could strike. Jon nodded, remembering the swirl of battle. I only did what had to be done. He forced a shaky breath, a mixture of sorrow and resolve. The real victory belongs to all of us. The free folk, the knights, the archers on the walls. Lyanna Mormont, Theon, the men from the Vale. I only dealt the final blow. Sansa's face tightened at the mention of Lyanna Mormont. The girl had been a force of nature. She died as she lived, Sansa said softly. A warrior, fearsome to the last. They stood in respectful silence, the battered tower seeming to hold the ghosts of all who had perished. Then Arya broke the hush. We've begun repairs, burying our dead with proper rites, what we can manage anyway. The day after tomorrow, we're holding a funeral pyre in the Godwood for Theon and for the others who died protecting Bran. It might help bring a measure of peace. Jon tried to straighten, though his body protested. I'll be there. Sansa waved a hand in gentle admonition. Don't push yourself. We need you strong enough to stand without doubling over. He set his jaw. I will stand whether it hurts or not. It's the least I can do to honor them. Besides, he looked at Rhaegal. We must show everyone that we remain united, that the threat of the dead is truly over. Sam rose, offering an apologetic shrug. Well, you aren't going to see the funeral pyres if you tear open your burns again. I'm sure the maester would ask you to rest for at least 2 more days. Jon grunted. I'll manage. Arya's lips quirked in that half-grin that reminded him of her fiery spirit as a child. I believe you. You fought through worse. I'll let you rest, though. We need to see to the soldiers who arrived from White Harbor, and there's an issue with the shipments from the Dread Fort. They haven't come in at all. She moved toward the door, paused. Glad to see you awake. Then she ducked out, silent as a shadow. Sansa lingered, her gaze flicking between Jon and Rhaegal. Some of the men, some of our people, are afraid, she admitted in a hushed tone. They trust you, but dragons are new to them. Many here still remember stories of the Field of Fire, or of Harrenhal, or the fate of Torrhen Stark bending the knee to Aegon the Conqueror. She sighed. We must show them that Rhaegal is here to protect the North. Jon nodded, hearing the unspoken worry in her voice, that this newly hatched dragon would overshadow the Stark legacy, that it might threaten the delicate loyalty of the houses. He was born of my blood, Jon said gently. He's as much the North's as he is mine. But we'll be careful. We don't want to frighten families who've suffered enough. Sansa managed a small, grateful smile, then left. Sam resumed his seat by the table, scribbling once more. Jon gazed at Rhaegal, who returned his look with a silent, questioning tilt of the head. The hush felt almost comforting. Ghost had eased himself onto all fours and padded closer, sniffing the bandages on Jon's arms. Reassured, the direwolf settled back down. Jon closed his eyes, exhaustion reclaiming him. As he drifted off, he felt the presence of both wolf and dragon in the tower, guardians in a world where old nightmares had come to pass. Perhaps a new age was dawning, an age where the lines between ice and fire might finally be bridged. He wondered if the children of the North would grow up hearing the echoing calls of Rhaegal overhead, and whether that would be a promise of protection or a reminder of the power that shaped their fate. 2 days later, just before dusk, Jon stood on shaky legs beneath the ancient heart tree in the Godwood. The white bark glimmered in the dying light, the carved face weeping red sap. It had borne witness to countless family gatherings, secrets, griefs. Now, gathered around were the living remnants of a great battle, hundreds of men and women who had survived the siege. The air smelled of pine and newly turned soil, overlaid by the harsh tang of death. Large pyres had been built around the perimeter, each designated for certain houses, certain groups of the fallen. Here, bodies of Theon Greyjoy and his Ironborn were arrayed, their arms crossed over their chests. Nearby lay the remains of Lyanna Mormont, small in stature but given a place of honor. Farther on, lines of the dead from the Vale, from the North, from the Free Folk, all prepared for the final farewell. Sansa stood on a dais fashioned from a simple wooden platform, clad in dark gray with a white fur mantle. Arya remained by her side, face solemn. Bran sat in his wheeled chair close by, his eyes distant in that uncanny way that suggested he saw more than anyone else. Davos oversaw the lighting of the funeral torches. Tormund Giantsbane stood with the free folk, face grim. Others clustered in hushed groups. They had lost so many, they had survived so narrowly. Jon took a step forward, ignoring the sharp twinge in his ribs. He held a torch in one hand. Beside him, Rhaegal prowled, the ground trembling faintly under the dragon's weight. Murmurs rippled through the crowd each time Rhaegal moved, though the beast kept a respectful distance from the arranged bodies, as if sensing the gravity of the moment. A hush settled. The Godswood's leaves rustled overhead. Sansa lifted her voice, clear and steady. We gather to mourn those who gave their lives in the battle against the dead. They came from many houses, many lands, but they stood as one. They died as heroes. We will not forget them. Her voice caught slightly, but she kept firm. May the old gods and the new guide them, and may their memories live on in Winterfell's halls and beyond. Arya's gaze flicked to Jon. He knew what was expected. He stepped forward, ignoring the pain. They fought in the darkest night we've ever known, he said quietly. They kept the living alive. We owe them everything. His eyes lingered on Theon's still face, expression etched in final repose. Lioness form, too small amidst the logs. He swallowed. We are alive because of them. We will remember. He raised the torch. Davos gave the signal, and dozens of other torches were lit. One by one, they pressed flame to the pyres. The wood caught quickly, smoke rising in twisting pillars. An orange glow flickered across the assembly, reflecting on tear-streaked faces. The air filled with the crackle of fire, a subdued chorus of farewell. Jon's throat tightened. All the old pains of losing brothers of the Night's Watch, losing Ygritte beyond the wall, losing all those who had died at Harhome, the weight pressed on him now, heavier than any chain. He forced himself to remain upright, breathing shallowly through the ache of his injuries. Beside him, Rhaegal uttered a low keening sound, as if lamenting in a dragon's way. A hush passed over the crowd. Those nearest shrank back a bit, startled, but Rhaegal didn't move aggressively. Instead, he lowered his head, and it almost seemed like a bow of respect toward the dead. The flames leapt higher, devouring flesh and bone, sending ashes drifting into the twilight sky. In that glow, Jon caught Sansa's gaze. Her lips curved in a sorrowful smile, acknowledging the dragon's gesture. For a time, none spoke. The hush was broken only by weeping, the pop and hiss of burning logs, the soft rustle of the godwood leaves in the evening breeze. This was a moment for grief and for acceptance. They had survived. Others had not. The price was before them, a sea of funeral pyres. Later, as the pyres burned down to embers and the smell of charred flesh thickened the air, people began to depart in somber groups. Some lingered, quiet with their thoughts. Jon felt every heartbeat as a dull ache. He wanted to stay until the fires died completely. He wanted to remain there, face to face with the cost of their victory. But Sam gently put a hand on Jon's shoulder, mindful of the raw skin. You need rest. Come. Ghost padded close, muzzle brushing Jon's side. The direwolf, too, seemed drained by the events of the night. Rhaegal gave a final low rumble, then followed at a distance as Jon walked slowly back to the courtyard. The castle walls bore fresh scars, collapsed sections, hastily erected wooden barriers, piles of broken stones. The repair crews had done their best in these few days, but Winterfell was far from whole. Once inside, Jon found a place to sit on a half-fallen rampart. The cold stone pressed against him. He stared at his hands, one wrapped in linen to protect the burn, the other scarred from the dagger's cut that had awakened the egg. Blood had sealed that bond, for better or worse. Soft footsteps approached. Sansa again, her cloak trailing behind, face drawn. She sat carefully beside him. A funeral is never easy, she said softly. But this one, so many. She lowered her gaze to her hands, which were clasped in her lap. We'll have months of rebuilding, years of heartbreak, but they did it. We did it. Jon shifted painfully, meeting her eyes. We must look ahead now. The Night King is gone, but the realm is not at peace. Word will reach King's Landing, if it hasn't already. Cersei will see an opportunity or a threat. And Daenerys? He trailed off, letting the weight of that name hang. Sansa's features tensed. She's still claiming the Iron Throne. You were the one who allied with her once. But that was before. Her gaze flicked briefly in the direction of Rhaegal, who lay a short distance away on a patch of cleared snow, his tail curling around his hind legs. Now we have a dragon, too, and the people who survived this will stand behind you, Jon. He swallowed. I never wanted them to kneel behind me. The words slipped out, half a protest, half a plea. They gave me the title king in the north once, but I only accepted it because the dead were coming. Now the dead are gone. Perhaps I can just do what's best for the realm without any crown. Sansa studied him a moment. You've always done what you believed was right. That's why they trust you. It's not about the crown you wear. It's about your heart. And after seeing you ride that dragon above the battlefield, her lips twitched in a faint smirk. You can't pretend to be just a simple bastard of Ned Stark anymore. He looked away, the old pang of identity returning, but overshadowed by everything that had happened. He felt the burn in his chest where a Targaryen's blood had protected him from the worst of the flames, or so it seemed. I'm still Jon. Stark, Targaryen, it doesn't matter. The North is my home. I won't abandon it. Sansa exhaled. Relief and tension intertwined. You may have no choice but to face the politics of it all soon enough. But for tonight, get some rest. We'll speak more in the morning. She rose, leaving him alone with the moan of the wind. He turned inward, letting the swirl of thoughts carry him. The old nightmares of the White Walkers had ended, but a new uncertainty loomed. House Lannister still ruled in King's Landing, the Iron Fleet lurked on the seas, Daenerys Targaryen commanded 2 grown dragons, and her claim to the throne was more valid than ever with the threat of the dead removed. She might well see him as a challenger now that he had a dragon of his own. If the realm was to avoid another brutal war, they would need careful diplomacy or immense luck. Jon glanced at Rhaegal, who raised his wedge-shaped head as if sensing Jon's gaze. The dragon's eyes glowed faintly in the moonlight. They stared at each other across the courtyard. In that moment, Jon felt an echo of the bond they had forged, not words, not exactly thoughts, but a resonance in the blood. There was a power between them woven by the magic of dragonkind, by the raw intensity of life and death. Maybe it would help them heal Westeros. Or maybe it would only invite more conflict. He set his jaw, determined that if he could prevent further bloodshed, he would. But if any foe threatened the North again, he would not hesitate to unleash Rhaegal's fury. Morning brought the crisp tang of early winter air along with a swirl of drifting snow in the courtyard. Jon rose, carefully stretched his sore muscles, and donned a thick black cloak lined with fur. After Sam changed his bandages, Jon descended the spiral steps to see what awaited him. The yard bustled with activity despite the cold. Piles of rubble from the collapsed gate were being carted off by a line of workers. A few blacksmiths hammered at half-broken swords or shaped metal for reinforcing the new gates. The smell of cooking oats and bacon wafted from the kitchens, but the usual chatter was subdued, overshadowed by the ghosts of the recent battle. Everywhere Jon looked, he saw reminders: a burned patch on the ground where whites had broken through, the ruin of a stable, the black scorch marks along the outer wall left by the undead dragon's icy flame. Still, life stirred. Hounds sniffed in corners. Some orphans played quietly in a corner near the well, watched over by a tired woman in a patched cloak. People turned their heads when they noticed Jon. They paused in their labor, some nodding politely, some offering half-smiles or murmured thanks. A few even bowed, an act that made Jon's stomach tighten. He was not their king, not truly, but the awe and gratitude in their eyes told him they saw him as something more than just the son of Ned Stark. A shape moved overhead, a shadow drifting across the snow. Jon looked up to see Rhaegal circling in a lazy arc, wings spread wide. The dragon let out a brief roar, then descended to perch on a broken section of battlement, chunks of stone still missing from the top. Workers scrambled away, startled by the sudden arrival. Rhaegal folded his wings, tail curling around the merlin. In the bright morning light, his scales gleamed with a luster reminiscent of polished bronze. The color shifted subtly around his belly and wing membranes, a faint swirl of green. He was bigger still, it seemed. The growth was astonishing, surpassing what anyone might have expected from a hatchling. Tormund Giantsbane emerged from around a corner, glancing up. He gave a short bark of laughter. "Ha! You're up and about, Snow. Thought you might be laid up for weeks after that nonsense in the tower." Jon approached, managing a slight grin despite the dark memories. "I heal fast." Tormund jerked a thumb at Rhaegal. "Your scaly friend hunts well enough. Saw him in the fields last night, snatching a few sheep." The farmers weren't so sure about that, but Sansa assured them the dragon would be fed from the castle's coffers. "For now. I suppose that's better than letting him eat their children." He chuckled as if it were only half a jest. Jon felt a twinge of guilt at the mention of sheep. Dragons needed food, lots of it. Daenerys had faced the same issue in Meereen, if rumors were true, paying for the livestock her dragons devoured. "We'll compensate any farmers who lose animals. Rhaegal didn't ask to be born into a land of winter with scarce prey. But we'll manage." Tormund thumped Jon's shoulder, mindful of the bandages. "Aye, that's the spirit. You always find a way." He looked up at the looming reptile. "And you'd best keep him under control. Doesn't take much for folk to sour on a beast that can burn entire armies." Jon acknowledged that grim truth with a nod. Tormund bid him farewell and went on his way, muttering something about a stiff drink and a soft bed. Jon made a mental note to talk to Sansa about the dragon's feeding schedule. If Rhaegal grew at this pace, they would need to plan carefully. The North had limited herds in winter. Perhaps in the warmer months, the dragon could hunt wild goats in the mountains or fish along the coasts. But for now, they must ensure the people did not turn resentful or afraid. He continued across the yard, pausing to speak with a few guards. They told him that, with the undead threat gone, a cautious relief had settled in. Wildling scouts had ridden beyond the edges of the shivering sea, not encountering a single wight. All was still. The wind carried only the sting of frost, not death. Jon found Sansa and Davos conferring near the Great Hall's entrance. A pair of local bannermen approached with worried expressions. Sansa saw Jon and beckoned him over. "Good morning," she said, forcing a hint of warmth into her tone. The two bannermen inclined their heads, though their eyes lingered on Jon's scars and the looming shape of Rhaegal on the battlements behind them. "We were just discussing the matter of White Harbor." The older bannerman, a lean man with a neatly trimmed gray beard, introduced himself as Lord Merton from a minor holdfast near the coast. "Ships from White Harbor have brought limited supplies," he said. "They claim House Manderly is gathering resources for a potential southern campaign: grain, salted fish, lumber. But the demands on them are heavy." Davos frowned, stroking his short beard. "House Manderly stands with the Starks, but they also have to maintain enough stores for their own people, especially if the war in the south continues. If the Lannisters or the Golden Company land on the eastern coast, White Harbor may face a siege." Sansa pressed her lips together. "We must ensure the North can feed itself. Winterfell is battered, but we're the seat of the North. The free folk are here, too, with Tormund, and we need to keep them from starving. Perhaps we can open negotiations with the Vale again. Lord Royce might provide additional grain shipments. Or the Riverlands, though they're under the Frey's long shadow." She glanced at Jon. "Thoughts?" He rubbed his neck, wincing at the bruises. Politics and supply lines weighed heavily on him, but it was a necessary burden. "If White Harbor can't meet the demand alone, we can send riders to the Barrowlands. House Dustin, House Ryswell. We can also begin forging new farmland in the areas we cleared of whites, though that'll take time. And the Vale might help, as you said. But the roads in winter are treacherous." He exhaled. "We'll do the best we can. If Daenerys secures the south, trade might open again, or we might need to do it ourselves if the war drags on." The conversation continued for some minutes, plans forming amidst the swirl of immediate crisis. Eventually, the bannermen departed to oversee the distribution of supplies, and Davos left to coordinate new watch schedules along the shattered walls. Sansa turned to Jon. The weight in her stance reminded him of how swiftly she had matured since her days as a bright-eyed girl dreaming of southern courts. "Everything's complicated now," she murmured. "The war is far from over. House Lannister won't simply abdicate." Jon met her eyes. "We'll find a path. The North will rebuild. And if the South comes to wage war, we'll face that challenge when we must." He looked past her to the hall's interior, which had been converted into a makeshift hospital for wounded men and women. "How are they faring?" She blew out a breath. "Better than we feared. Sam, the maester, and some healers from the Vale have been treating them. We have enough milk of the poppy for now, but we need more bandages, more linens, more of everything. The wagons from the west might arrive in a week, if the roads hold." Jon gave a slow nod. "I'll speak to Sam about searching the stores. Maybe we can repurpose some old cloaks or curtains." His voice caught momentarily, the memory of that old tapestry he'd lit on fire in the tower to hatch Rhaegal. So many relics gone, but at least that sacrifice had led to victory. Sansa's gaze softened. "You should see how the wounded are doing, too. They'll be glad for your presence. The men believe in you, especially after that night." He understood. The North revered its heroes, and though he disliked the pedestal they placed him on, he also recognized the power of morale. A single encouraging word from him might kindle hope. He nodded. "I will." Inside the great hall, the air was thick with the smells of blood, sweat, and boiled herbs. Rows of cots stretched from one side to the other, each occupied by someone with an injury, some minor, some grave. A handful of maesters and volunteer healers moved among them, administering potions, cleaning wounds. Jon moved slowly down the rows, offering a nod or a brief word to each soldier who managed to lift their head. He paused at a cot where an older man with a bandage wrapped around his eyes lay motionless. Next to him sat a young woman, her hand cradling his. She looked up at Jon and recognized him, tears shining. "He lost his sight to the White's claws," she whispered. "But he's alive." Jon rested a hand gently on the man's shoulder, voice low. "You fought bravely for the living. The North remembers." The words felt inadequate, but the man's lips trembled in a faint smile. Jon moved on, guilt settling heavily in his chest. All these people had suffered, many for a cause they barely understood. They had answered the call to fight an evil older than the realm itself, trusting in a handful of leaders to see them through. Further along, he found Sam pressing a poultice to the stump of a warrior's arm. The warrior winced, but Sam murmured reassurance. When Sam caught sight of Jon, he offered an exhausted smile. "We've been making do. This one, well, the stump is healing, but I fear infection." Jon squeezed the warrior's remaining hand. "We'll do everything we can." He and Sam exchanged a weary look. This was the price of victory. They had all known it might be steep, but seeing the consequences in each bandaged wound, each missing limb, each moan of pain, hammered the reality home. Jon lingered, helping as best he could, offering water, a word of thanks, a clasp o' hands. So many eyes turned to him with a mixture of reverence and quiet desperation. It tore at him, but he kept going, room by room, until he felt his strength wane. At last, Sam steered him aside. "Enough, Jon. You'll reopen your wounds if you don't rest." Jon leaned against a table, fighting dizziness. His arms ached. The burns on his chest felt raw. He realized he hadn't eaten since morning. "Fine," he managed. "But I'll come back later." Sam nodded, not pressing further. "I'll hold you to that. Go on, eat, sleep if you can." Jon dragged himself toward the exit. Outside, Rhaegal's silhouette crouched at the top of the steps. Some of the wounded who could still walk stared, uneasy. Yet the dragon made no threatening move. Jon ran a hand along Rhaegal's flank in passing, feeling the warm scales under his palm. The creature rumbled softly, leaning into the touch. He turned toward the kitchens, hoping to find something warm to eat. Halfway there, he heard a commotion at the castle gates, a raised voice, the sound of hooves on slushy ground. Curiosity aroused, he changed direction, ignoring the fatigue tugging at him. At the gates, a small entourage had arrived, a handful of riders wearing thick cloaks and battered armor. Their banner displayed a golden rose entwined with vines, albeit muddy and tattered. The men spoke animatedly to the Winterfell guards. Jon recognized the banner, House Tyrell's old sigil, although House Tyrell had effectively fallen when the Reach was claimed by the Lannisters and Tarly men. Perhaps these were remnants or sworn swords seeking refuge. He approached. One of the riders, a tall woman with a face reddened by cold, spotted him and drew her horse closer. "I seek the Warden of the North," she said, voice echoing slightly under her hood. Then, noticing Jon's presence, her eyes widened. "Lord Snow?" Jon nodded, stepping forward. "I am Jon Snow of House Stark, or Targaryen, depending on who you ask. But either way, I speak for Winterfell." "Who are you?" She dismounted, wincing at a stiff leg. "Ser Brianna of Grey Shield, sworn to the old House Tyrell. We are stragglers from the Reach. The war with the Lannisters left us scattered. When we heard the dead were marching, many of us tried to ride north to aid. But we were slowed by storms, Lannister patrols, we arrived too late." Her gaze flicked to the battered castle. "We heard rumors that the dead have been vanquished, that you hatched a dragon and slew the Night King. Is that true?" Jon exchanged a quick look with the guards. Word truly had spread fast. "We did defeat them," he said, "but not without heavy losses. If you've come to help, you're welcome to shelter here, though we can't promise lavish comfort." Ser Brianna's shoulders sagged in relief. "We have nowhere else to go. The Lannisters claimed the Reach, installed their own lords. We rode to fight the greater threat, but we found only empty roads and rumors. Any place among the living is better than returning to serve them. We beg your hospitality." Jon nodded. "You shall have it, so long as you break no laws and respect the people here." He turned to the guard. "Find them stables for their horses, see that they have food. Let them rest." With expressions of gratitude, the riders followed the guards inside. Jon wondered how many others would come, refugees from the southern conflicts, sworn swords of extinct or displaced houses. The realm was fractured. Each day brought new reminders that the living were scattered by the War of the Five Kings, by the Lannisters' conquests, by everything that had transpired before the undead even marched. Sighing, he continued to the kitchens. A quick meal of bread, stew, and ale restored some energy, though it sat heavily on his stomach. He was about to return to his chambers when Sansa appeared, looking both anxious and triumphant at once. "A raven," she said quickly. "From Dragonstone." Jon tensed, setting his spoon aside. "Daenerys?" Sansa passed him the parchment. Her handmaiden wrote it, apparently at the Queen's dictation. "She's heard the Night King is slain. She congratulates us. She also requests we open our gates to her and her army that we might discuss the next phase of the campaign against Cersei. She wants to meet you and your dragon." The words hung heavy between them. Jon unrolled the parchment, scanning the neat script. He recognized a certain measured courtesy in the lines, presumably to mask any underlying tension. Daenerys Targaryen wrote that she was delighted to hear the living had triumphed, that she regretted not arriving sooner, that she would soon march north to secure a final peace. Then a direct line about the new dragon. "I trust my nephew will welcome my arrival, and we shall see together that the realm is united." Jon's stomach clenched. He had insisted he wanted no crown, but he had made Daenerys his queen before. Now everything had changed. He also recalled that she might not relish the news that he, too, possessed Targaryen blood and had hatched a dragon in her absence, particularly a dragon that might challenge her authority as the mother of dragons. She might fear that others would favor Jon over her for the Iron Throne. The question was whether they could avoid bloodshed between them. Sansa's voice was quiet. "You'll have to decide whether to let her in. We can't close our gates to a woman who fought with us at the Field of Fire near the loot train. She also aided in the fight against the Night King, if only from afar. But the North will not want to kneel so easily again." Jon looked up, gaze somber. "I won't let more of our people die in a war for the throne. The Lannisters must be dealt with, yes, but if Daenerys wants to claim the North, I'll stand in her way. We can't endure another war of conquest." Sansa studied his face carefully. "You're Targaryen too. You could be the rightful king by blood. Do you truly want to remain only the guardian of the North?" His jaw tightened. "I'm not some usurper. I only want what's best for the realm. Daenerys has fought tyranny before. Perhaps we can find common ground. The White Walkers are gone, so that unifying threat has passed. Now we must unify another way, or we all risk falling back into chaos." She nodded, though uncertainty flickered in her eyes. "Then we should prepare for her arrival. She'll come with Unsullied, Dothraki, and 2 full-grown dragons. Keep that in mind." Jon glanced at Rhaegal's silhouette through the window, a younger dragon, still growing but fierce. He pictured Drogon and Rhaegal, each the size of a warship, overshadowing him. "We'll greet her as allies if that's what she wants. But if she demands fealty," he trailed off, letting the implication hang. Sansa's lips pressed into a thin line. One step at a time. They decided that Jon would send a raven back, inviting Daenerys to parley in Winterfell's courtyard. They would provide accommodations for her men to the best of their ability, though space was limited. The letter conveyed a cautious yet respectful tone. Jon ended it with a note that they had all sacrificed for the living and that they should not let old divisions overshadow their chance at peace now. Then it was done. The raven took flight within the hour, skimming over the patched walls and vanishing into the gray sky. After that, the days passed in a flurry of preparation. Jon's burns slowly improved. He no longer needed heavy bandages, only salve. He took a more active role directing repairs to Winterfell. Craftsmen from smaller northern towns arrived to lend their hands, paying tribute to the castle that had borne the brunt of the undead assault. Rhaegal continued to grow, prowling the battlements or soaring overhead in wide circles. Sometimes the dragon vanished for hours, hunting in the nearby forests, returning with the carcass of a deer or a wild goat. Jon worried that it might alarm local villagers, but no reports of attacks on humans came. For now at least, Rhaegal seemed more interested in game. Sentries began rotating in fresh shifts, on the alert for any sign of Daenerys' approach. Each day, the North's leadership gathered in the Great Hall. Sansa, Arya, Davos, Tormund, the Maester, occasionally Brienne of Tarth, who had survived, battered but unbowed. They discussed everything from grain shipments to the disposal of the White's remnants. At times, the conversation circled back to the uncertain future. Would Daenerys attempt to claim the North by force? Was Cersei raising an army to strike the moment Daenerys marched away? The realm was in flux and no easy answers emerged. Jon spent his spare moments with Rhaegal. The dragon's acceptance of him was undeniable. It let him touch its head, run a hand down the ridges of its neck, even rub the scaled chest where a deep warmth emanated. Once, while perched near an old watchtower, Rhaegal bowed low enough for Jon to climb onto its back, and they soared briefly over Winterfell. The flight was shorter than the one during the battle, a test of trust and strength. Still, by the time they landed, a crowd of onlookers had gathered, gazing up in amazement and some measure of fear. Jon dismounted, expression grim. He knew he risked fueling rumors that he aimed to be a dragon-riding king. Sansa later reminded him to be cautious. Some lords were already grumbling that they'd merely swapped one Targaryen queen for another Targaryen claimant. Jon retorted that those same lords wouldn't be alive if not for the dragon's help, but he took the warning seriously. The North had no love for the Targaryens historically. Jon's position was precarious. Then, one cold afternoon, scouts raced through the gates, breath steaming as they tumbled from their horses. "They're here," cried one, excitement and anxiety warring in his voice. "The Queen's army. They're less than a league out. 2 dragons in the sky, black and green." A hush fell over the courtyard. Workers paused, exchanging glances. Everyone remembered the last time Daenerys arrived in the north with her dragons, though that had been overshadowed by the threat of the White Walkers. Now, the living had to face each other without the unifying specter of the dead. Jon called for the War Council to gather quickly. They decided to greet Daenerys outside the walls, an act of courtesy, but also caution, ensuring her dragons wouldn't land unopposed. Sansa insisted on wearing her best furs, a signal of northern pride. Arya stood near her, silent as ever, a pair of daggers strapped to her hips. Davos and Tormund flanked them. Sam was absent, tending to a birthing mother in the makeshift hospital. Bran remained inside, though Jon wasn't sure if that was due to his physical limitations or a deeper, mysterious reason. Jon mounted a horse, his breath a cloud in the icy air, and led a small party beyond Winterfell's gates. Rhaegal soared overhead, circling at a distance. He seemed restless, as though sensing a coming confrontation with others of his kind. They didn't ride far, just to the open field near the western approach where the snow had been trampled into slush. Before long, the distant roar of dragons echoed through the clouds. 2 massive shapes appeared, the first black as midnight with wings that seemed to blot out the sky, the second a deep green with hints of bronze. Drogon and Rhaegal. Each had a rider, Daenerys Targaryen astride Drogon and presumably one of her trusted allies. Possibly she rode Rhaegal at times, but from the silhouettes, Jon guessed she remained with the largest dragon. The other might be bearing one of her close advisors or a Dothraki bloodrider. Behind them spread an army, unsullied in neat ranks, Dothraki horsemen, knights bearing the 3-headed dragon banner. A smaller retinue carried other flags. Some from houses that had once followed her in the south, or from newly pledged lords seeking her favor. The entire force was smaller than the one she had once brought across the sea, likely whittled down by battles with Cersei or by desertions and distance. But it was still formidable, thousands strong, well-armed, disciplined, and with 2 fully grown dragons in their midst. Jon reined in his horse, the winter wind whipping his cloak about him. Sansa, Davos, and the others waited at his side, hearts pounding. The North's own men were drawn up along the castle walls, watchful. Rhaegal glided overhead, letting out a resonant call, a challenge or a greeting, impossible to say. The 2 older dragons circled lower, sending gusts of air and snow swirling around them. Finally, they landed a short distance from Jon's welcoming party, wings folding. Drogon hissed, tendrils of smoke curling from his maw. Daenerys dismounted with practiced grace, her silver-gold hair pulled back, a cloak of crimson and black swirling around her. Even from a distance, Jon noted the set of her jaw, the regal tilt of her chin. A group of Unsullied formed a protective semicircle behind her, spears upright. The second dragon settled with a snort, and from its back slid a figure clad in dark leathers, Missandei, perhaps, or Grey Worm. No, that form was too slight for Grey Worm. Likely it was Missandei. Grey Worm emerged at the front of the Unsullied ranks, helmet under his arm. Daenerys moved forward, stopping a few paces from Jon. Her eyes flicked over him, lingering on the burns that still marred his collar and arms visible at the edges of his furs. Then her gaze traveled skyward to Rhaegal, who circled in slow arcs. Surprise, curiosity, maybe a hint of wariness crossed her features. Finally, she schooled her expression into a calm mask. "Jon Snow," she said, voice resonant despite the wind. "I am pleased to see you alive and well. I'd heard many things." She glanced at Sansa, Arya, and the others. "You saved the realm from the Night King." Jon dismounted, nodding in acknowledgement. "Not alone. Many fought and died. But the White Walkers are gone now, Your Grace. The living prevailed." She inclined her head. "So it seems." Her eyes lifted again to Rhaegal. A quiet intensity burned there. "And you have a dragon. I never imagined." "Well, life is full of surprises." Jon gestured to the shattered battlements in the distance. "Winterfell took heavy damage, but it stands. We invite you and your army inside. Our supplies are strained, but we'll do what we can. We have much to discuss." Daenerys glanced back at the ranks of her men, then at Drogon, who let out a low rumble. "A parley, yes, but my soldiers will remain alert. I've fought too many battles to walk blindly into another's domain." Sansa exchanged a curt nod with Arya, stepping forward. "You'll be afforded courtesy as our guest," Sansa said coolly. There was no love lost between them. Sansa's experiences had taught her caution with would-be monarchs. "We trust you'll grant us the same respect." Daenerys met Sansa's gaze, a flicker of tension passing between them. "Of course, I do not come as a conqueror, but as an ally if you'll have me. Once we fought side by side. Let us not forget that we share a common enemy in Cersei Lannister." Jon cut in before either side's hackles could rise further. "Then let's speak inside, out of the cold. We'll find a space for your top commanders. We can arrange quarters for the rest in the outbuildings, though I fear our resources are meager." Daenerys's expression softened slightly. "Thank you. My men have marched far. They'll be grateful for shelter from the wind." She cast another look at Rhaegal, who was swooping down to land a short distance away, stirring snow as he touched ground. The younger dragon regarded the older ones with a posture of wary curiosity. Drogon responded with a low hiss, while Rhaegal rumbled, uncertain. Daenerys's lips parted in astonishment. "He's truly yours?" Jon stepped closer, placing a calm hand on Rhaegal's flank. The dragon's heat radiated through his glove. "He hatched the night of the battle," Jon said quietly, "and we bonded. He's as much the North's dragon as he is mine." He paused, hearing the undercurrent in his words. "We've both given everything to keep our people alive. If you come as a friend, he won't harm you." Daenerys studied the beast, something like wonder dancing in her eyes. "I never thought to see another egg hatch. My 3 were said to be the last. Yet here stands a 4th, born in Westeros itself." For a moment, her guarded demeanor slipped, revealing genuine awe. Then she drew herself up. "Very well, let us proceed. Drogon and Rhaegal will remain outside the walls. Drogon doesn't take kindly to closed spaces." Jon nodded. "Of course, we'll stable your horses. We can tie them near the smithy where there's warmth. Come." Thus, they returned to Winterfell, the two armies merging with an undercurrent of tense curiosity. The Unsullied filed in perfect order behind Grey Worm, while the Dothraki eyed the looming towers with mistrust, leading their horses in search of feed and water. Northmen on the battlements watched with hands near their weapons, ready for any sign of betrayal. Rhaegal circled overhead, occasionally gliding lower to peer at the older dragons outside the walls, as though drawn to them by instinct. Inside the keep, Daenerys's retinue walked the corridors with solemn steps. Jon led them to the great hall, where a large table had been cleared. The banners of House Stark hung on the walls, scorched in places. Daenerys's gaze drifted over the charred patches, the broken rafters overhead. She murmured something to Missandei about the severity of the battle. Jon caught only a snippet. "It was worse than any field I've seen," Daenerys said softly. Sansa, Davos, and Arya took seats at the head of the table. Jon invited Daenerys to do the same. Missandei, Grey Worm, and a couple of Dothraki khals joined her, though the latter seemed uneasy indoors. Tormund, arms folded, lingered near the side, not quite sitting, not quite standing, casting watchful glances at the newcomers. Daenerys spoke first. "I offer my condolences for your losses. We tried to ride north in time, but Lannister hostilities delayed us." Jon stiffened slightly, recalling how Cersei had once promised help, only to betray them, yet he kept his tone measured. "We understand. The important thing is that the Night King is gone." He leaned forward. "Now, the realm faces a different threat, the last Lannister on the Iron Throne." Grey Worm's expression hardened. Daenerys gave a decisive nod. "We have come to finish what we started. Remove Cersei, take the throne, and unite the 7 kingdoms. We have the might, and with the White Walkers gone, we can focus fully on her. But we require the North's support. Sansa's mouth set in a line. What do you mean by the North support? Are you asking for our men to march under your banner, after everything we've lost? Or do you mean you intend to conscript us? Daenerys hesitated a fraction, clearly aware that winning over the North was no easy task. I won't conscript anyone, but I do ask you to join me in liberating the realm from a tyrant who would see you all starve if she could. Cersei starves the poor, taxes the small folk into ruin. She's holed up in King's Landing, guarded by mercenaries from Essos, the Golden Company, and the remnants of her loyal forces. She glanced at Jon. If we don't stand together, she'll pick us off one by one, starting with your wounded North. Arya's cool voice interrupted. And what happens when the war is done? Do you intend to rule the North as well? You once demanded fealty from my brother. From Jon. Daenerys's gaze shifted. She and Arya had never been close, and she understood Arya's protective nature. I demanded fealty then because we were at war against the dead and needed unity. Now, the situation is different. She flicked a look at Jon, a question unspoken. I know of your lineage, Jon, Samwell Tarly informed you, and it seems you told no one but your closest kin at first. But now, everyone knows you carry Targaryen blood. A current of tension rippled around the table. Sansa's expression tightened. Tormund's brow lifted in interest. Grey Worm remained impassive, though he placed a hand on his spear's haft. Davos kept his gaze on Jon, silently supportive. Jon let out a slow breath. I carry Targaryen blood, yes, but I was raised Stark. I've never wanted the Iron Throne. My priority is the North's safety. If we can come to a just arrangement, if the North can remain free to govern itself, perhaps we can talk alliance. But if you insist that the North must kneel, Daenerys lifted a hand, forestalling him. We need not come to that. The realm must be united, but I recall the time when Aegon allowed certain regions greater autonomy, so long as they swore not to wage war on the crown. If the North desires a measure of independence under the Targaryen banner, that can be discussed. Her eyes flicked from face to face. I won't lose your support again, Jon. We share the same blood. We share the same goal, to protect the living, to bring stability to Westeros. And now we share a bond with dragons, it seems. A murmur rose among the Northmen. Some looked skeptical, others thoughtful. Sansa exchanged a glance with Arya, who gave a slight shrug. The younger Stark sister rarely engaged in these negotiations, but her support mattered. Davos cleared his throat. If I may, Your Grace, the North has paid a heavy price for every southern conflict. We lost thousands to the White Walkers. Our coffers and granaries are near empty. If you expect us to raise banners again so soon, it would cause hardship. Daenerys inclined her head. I understand. That's why I brought supplies from Dragonstone. Grain from my storehouses, salted fish from the Narrow Sea. Not enough to feed all the North, but a start. I also have gold seized from Lannister outposts in the Crownlands, which I can use to purchase more supplies from Essos. That revelation sparked surprise in the hall. Tormund let out a low whistle. Sansa's eyes flickered. You mean to provision us? Yes, Daenerys said simply. We can't fight well if your people are starving. And if you do choose to send forces south, you'll need them fed. I plan to set up a supply route from White Harbor once we secure the coasts. I also hope to do the same from the Vale, if Lord Royce and little Robin Arryn can be convinced. But for that, I need your help. The North is a key power, more so now than ever before. She was no fool, Jon realized. She knew the North commanded great respect after single-handedly defeating the White Walkers. And he, with a newly hatched dragon, carried a certain aura that might rally or repel. Daenerys was playing both the queen and the diplomat, appealing to their battered resources, their sense of duty, their war weariness. Sansa drew in a slow breath. If we accept your help and we give you, what, exactly? Soldiers? An oath not to side with Cersei. Daenerys spread her hands. Soldiers, if possible. But if you can't spare many, your moral and strategic support might suffice. I know that your men are exhausted. Even a symbolic force of Northerners led by Jon might rally the Riverlands or others to our cause. And yes, an oath not to side with Cersei in any capacity. Arya's eyes narrowed. If you fail to oust Cersei, we might find ourselves the target of her vengeance. Daenerys' jaw tightened. I have every intention of removing her from power. Between my forces, the alliances we can forge, and the dragons, I see no reason we can't succeed. The only question is how quickly and how bloodlessly. Silence weighed on the hall. Jon glanced around at the uncertain faces. The truth was, the North couldn't remain isolated forever. If Cersei consolidated power, she'd eventually come for them. The best chance to avoid more bloodshed in the North might be to help Daenerys defeat Cersei decisively in the South. Then, with the White Walkers gone and the Lannisters deposed, perhaps a stable peace might follow. He thought of the alternative, refusing Daenerys' alliance. That could lead to war between the Targaryens, an outcome he desperately wanted to avoid. He spoke at last. We need time to discuss this among the northern houses. But I'm inclined to believe we share more interests than differences. I propose a short respite, let your men rest, let the North's lords gather here. We'll hold a council in a few days, and if we can agree on terms, we'll unify our forces against Cersei. Daenerys nodded, relief shading her features. That's reasonable. She paused, looking at each face. One thing more, I'd like to see the new dragon. Rhaegal. Jon wasn't surprised. Of course. He's in the courtyard, or sometimes he perches on the walls. He's free to come and go as he pleases. Grey Worm stiffened slightly as if fearing a trap. But Daenerys gave him a reassuring glance. I'd like to witness him up close. And perhaps my dragons would too. A hint of excitement broke through her queenly composure. Another living dragon, it's a wonder. Jon found himself remembering the first time he'd touched Rhaegal. The awe, the terror, the bond. He offered Daenerys a measured smile. I'll show you. But be warned, he's young, still learning, and protective of the North. Keep a respectful distance at first. She returned the smile, albeit faintly. I have some experience with dragons, as you know. They rose, concluding the parley. Sansa guided Daenerys and her advisors toward a wing of the castle that had been hastily cleared and readied for guests. Jon lingered behind a moment with Arya, exchanging a look that spoke volumes: caution, hope, skepticism. Then he followed Daenerys outside. In the courtyard, Daenerys' eyes immediately locked onto Rhaegal perched on a mound of snow-crusted rubble. The younger dragon hissed, smoke curling from his nostrils. Across the walls, glimpses of Unsullied and Northern guards mingling, each watching the other warily. Drogon and Rhaegal soared overhead, letting out calls that reverberated in Jon's chest. Rhaegal raised his head, answering with a sharper, higher-pitched roar as though announcing himself. Daenerys moved carefully forward, hands at her sides. He's smaller than Drogon, but strong, she murmured. His coloring reminds me of Rhaegal's, greens and bronze, the same swirling patterns. Jon nodded. When I found the egg, I thought of Rhaegal. But apparently it's from a different lineage, an egg left in Winterfell's crypts centuries ago. She turned to him, eyes bright with curiosity. In the crypts? That means the Targaryens left it here after the conquest. Or perhaps one of the princes visited the North. It's a piece of living history. Jon approached Rhaegal, letting the dragon catch his scent. The onlookers in the courtyard drew back, forming a wide circle. Daenerys followed, each step deliberate. Drogon and Rhaegal circled lower, as if eager to see this newcomer. Rhaegal hissed again, uncertain, scanning the sky with a flick of his tail. Jon whispered calming words, pressing a hand to the dragon's neck. Gradually, Rhaegal's tension eased. Daenerys raised a tentative hand. May I? Jon studied Rhaegal's posture. The dragon did not recoil, so he nodded. Daenerys stepped closer. Her palm came to rest on a patch of scale near Rhaegal's shoulder, just as Jon had done when forging the bond. Rhaegal rumbled, not quite displeased, more curious. A wave of nostalgia flickered across Daenerys' face. The scales are warm, so warm. I remember when Drogon was smaller than this, how I used to feed him scraps of meat in the Red Waste. A cluster of Unsullied watched from the edge of the yard, clearly tense. Grey Worm had a hand on his spear. Northern archers stood on the walls, arrows nocked, just in case. It was a moment that could turn explosive if anything went awry. But Rhaegal merely sniffed Daenerys' arm, then turned his head toward Drogon and Rhaegal as they landed outside the walls. Jon felt the crackle of power in the air, 3 dragons in the north, though only one was aligned wholeheartedly with the Starks. Was it a harbinger of a new Targaryen renaissance, or a sign of chaos to come? Daenerys withdrew her hand, stepping back. He's magnificent, she breathed. And loyal to you. Yes, Jon replied. Our bond was forged in blood and fire, not so different from how you hatched your own. He paused. I hope we can avoid a rivalry between them. She exhaled slowly. They're dragons, not men. They may test each other, but they share a kinship. So do we, whether we like it or not. She glanced away, then met Jon's gaze. This is a chance for our houses to unite, truly unite. Not in fear, but in hope. Will you take that chance? Jon's throat tightened. He'd wrestled with these questions for so long. His birthright, his duty, his loyalty. The memory of the Night King's cold glare haunted him, reminding him that life was fragile and easily snuffed out. If they kept fighting each other, Westeros would never know peace. I will, if it spares the North further suffering. I won't bend the knee blindly, but I'll stand with you against Cersei if we can negotiate fair terms. The North should remain free to govern itself. Under a greater alliance, yes, but not as a subjugated province. Daenerys searched his face, then nodded slowly. I believe we can find a compromise. My father's rule ended in madness. I don't intend to repeat his mistakes. We will talk more in time. Jon heard the sincerity in her voice, laced with the steel of a queen. He realized that this was a pivotal juncture in Westeros' story. 3 dragons living, a Targaryen queen who sought the throne, a Targaryen-born Stark who had claimed the North's loyalty, and a realm weary of war. If they could find a way to stand together, perhaps the bloodshed would end. If not, dragons would clash, and the land would bleed again. Daenerys offered a faint smile, dropping her hand to her side. He's beautiful, she repeated, glancing at Rhaegal. A new flame in a land of ice. May he bring you fortune. Jon nodded, touched by her words despite his reservations. He rested a hand on Rhaegal's flank, feeling the dragon's heartbeat resonate under his palm. Overhead, the clouds parted, allowing a pale shaft of winter sun to pierce the courtyard. Rhaegal closed his eyes, soaking in the warmth. For a fleeting moment, the memory of the nightmare battle felt like a distant dream. Men labored to find stable ground for the newcomers' tents, unsullied and northerners crossing paths with polite but tense nods. The hiss of dragons above reminded everyone that they lived in a time of legends reborn. Jon stood at the threshold of great change. He remembered the vow he'd made to himself. He would not let Rhaegal's power become a cause for further devastation. If the realm was to know peace, it had to start with the leaders who controlled these forces of nature. He and Daenerys exchanged one more look, an uneasy alliance forming in that space. Then they turned, walking together into the heart of Winterfell, leaving Rhaegal perched behind them. Outside, Drogon and Rhaegal uttered echoing cries. The North's people watched, uncertain, but perhaps with a flicker of renewed hope. The realm's fate hung in the balance, resting on the shoulders of 2 Targaryens who had once been strangers, but now found themselves bound by blood, dragons, and the shared dream of an end to endless war. In the hush of that courtyard, with the wind rustling the broken banners overhead, Jon couldn't help but wonder if the gods had destined this from the moment Rhaegal's egg was sealed away in Winterfell's crypts. All he could do was stand firm, guided by duty and tempered by mercy, and pray that their fragile unity would hold. It was a new chapter for Westeros. The shadows of the dead had receded, but the shadows of ambition, pride, and fear still loomed. Against them, a newly forged alliance of fire and ice would be tested beyond measure. For now, at least, the dragons did not roar in anger, and the swords remained sheathed. The specter of war in the south was daunting, but a tentative peace held in the north. And within Jon's heart, a guarded optimism sparked, like the first glimmer of dawn after a long night. He rested a hand on the pommel of Longclaw, felt the faint heat from Rhaegal's presence behind him, and marched forward at Daenerys' side into whatever future the gods had woven for them all.